Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. Tonight, I'll be your guide through one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries of the Cold War era. I want you to imagine this. It's a freezing winter night in 1959, deep in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. A group of young adventurers huddles together inside a tent pitched on a snowy slope of a mountain, ominously known as Dead Mountain. Laughter echoes inside as they write in their journals by flashlight, trade jokes, and talk about the next day's trek. They have no idea this will be the last night of their lives. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a mystery that has haunted experts, investigators, and conspiracy theorists alike for more than 6 decades. My name's James, and I've spent weeks immersed in old case files, faded diaries, autopsy reports, and the final photographs taken by the group. The more I read, the deeper I fall into this story. The Dyatlov Pass Incident doesn't feel like a typical tragedy. It feels like something out of a nightmare, a tale that straddles the line between reality and horror fiction. Let's break it down step by step, like detectives working a cold case. Our story begins in late January 1959. 10 experienced ski hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on an ambitious expedition to reach Mount Ototen, far up in the northern Urals. Most of them were, in their early 20s, 7 men and 2 women, full of life, energy, and passion for the wild. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student with a sharp mind and a calm, focused demeanor. The 10th member, and the oldest, was an experienced instructor named Semyon Zolotaryov, a man in his late 30s who had joined the group last minute. On January 23rd, the team received their approved travel route and left the city of Sverdlovsk, catching a train to the town of Ivdel. Picture them on that train, laughing, making plans. Someone playing a mandolin one of them had packed. They were full of youthful bravado, joking around, their journals full of optimistic entries and sketches. After 2 days of travel by train, the group reached Ivdel, a small remote settlement on the edge of the frozen Ural wilderness. It was also the site of a Soviet prison camp, a grim reminder of how remote and unforgiving this region could be. From there, they boarded a bus, then hitched a ride in the back of a lumber truck to a village called Vizhai, the last inhabited outpost, before the true wilderness began. The locals in Vizhai likely watched the group with a mix of admiration and quiet worry. These university students were clearly smart and driven, but the route they had planned was brutal, classified as Category 3, the most difficult, and they were attempting it in February, the harshest, most punishing month of the Siberian winter. On January 27th, the group left Vizhai and began skiing into the wilderness. But just a day later, one of them had to turn back. Yuri Yudin, suffering from rheumatism and a congenital spinal issue, began to experience severe joint pain. On January 28th, he reluctantly said goodbye to his friends and returned to Vizhai. It was a hard decision, but one that saved his life. Yuri would become the only survivor of the Dyatlov expedition. He would never see his friends again. The other 9 pushed on into the snowy expanse. Through the diaries and photographs they left behind, some damaged, some perfectly preserved, investigators were able to piece together their movements. On January 31st, the group reached the edge of a highland plateau. There, in a wooded valley, they cached extra food and gear to lighten their load for the climb and to use on the way back. That night, spirits were high. They laughed, took silly photos, and even made a satirical little newsletter called the Evening Otorten, with handwritten jokes and sketches. One entry joked, "From now on we know that the snowmen exist," probably a tongue-in-cheek reference to the local Mansi legends about Yetis. On February 1st, the team began to move through a mountain pass, which would later bear Dyatlov's name. Their plan was to cross the pass and camp on the other side for the night. But then the weather shifted dramatically. A brutal snowstorm rolled in, the wind howling like a freight train and visibility dropping to nothing. Blinded by snow and thrown off course, they lost their bearings. Instead of reaching the other side of the pass, they veered west and began ascending the slopes of a mountain called Cholatsiachel, a name that, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, means dead mountain. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late in the day. The snow was blowing sideways and light was fading fast. They were stuck high on the mountain, in an exposed area with no natural shelter. Climbing back down into the forest for protection would have taken time and effort, and it would have meant losing the elevation they had gained. So, Igor Dyatlov made a decision that would be endlessly debated later. He chose to stop right there, on the slope, and pitch their tent on the bare snow. Maybe he wanted to test their endurance. Maybe he thought they could handle it. Maybe he just didn't want to lose progress. With axes and skis, they carved a platform into the snow and set up their tent, anchoring it against the brutal wind. It was cold, exhausting work, but they did it. 9 young people, confident and determined, curled up together inside that tent, unaware that they were sleeping on the edge of a terrifying unknown. And that's where the real mystery begins. The night of February 1st, 1959, must have been punishing. Winds screamed over the ridge, and the air temperature plunged to nearly 20 degrees C. The howling gusts whipped across the exposed slope of Dead Mountain. But inside the tent, the 9 hikers were as comfortable as they could be. They had set up camp on the snow-covered incline, carving out a flat surface with their axes, anchoring the tent firmly and layering it with their belongings for insulation. Despite the brutal conditions outside, they managed to stay warm. Around 6:30 p.m., they had dinner, something simple but nourishing. Later, forensic analysis of their stomach contents confirmed this. They likely ate in small groups, passing around bits of sallow, pork fat, bread and tea, still laughing and cracking jokes despite the raging storm outside. In one of the last photographs developed from the group's recovered cameras, they're seen smiling and relaxed as they prepare their camp in the fading twilight, their faces lit by the soft glow of dusk and perhaps a shared sense of accomplishment. They didn't know it, but this would be their final night. As they zipped up the tent flap and settled in for the evening, they probably wrote in their journals by flashlight, planning the next day's push. Some may have already drifted off to sleep in their sleeping bags, tired from the climb and chilled from the cold, but content. The storm outside roared, but inside the tent was calm, until suddenly it wasn't. Sometime after midnight, in the pitch-black hours of February 2nd, something went terribly wrong. We don't have living witnesses to tell us what happened. What we do have is evidence, and that evidence paints a scene straight out of a horror movie. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. 9 people, some sleeping, some perhaps still awake, suddenly burst out of their only shelter and into a blizzard. In nothing but their base layers, some barefoot, others with one boot or a sock, they ran or staggered away from the tent. They left behind almost everything: their heavy jackets, snow boots, gloves, hats, and even their axes and sleeping bags. It was 30 degrees Celsius outside. In those conditions, just minutes without proper clothing can lead to frostbite. An hour can mean death. So what on earth could have caused them to flee like that? That single question has haunted investigators for over 60 years. When the group failed to return to Vijay by February 12th as scheduled, there wasn't immediate concern. Delays in winter expeditions were common. A few days late wasn't unusual. But by February 16th, with still no word, the hikers' families began to worry. By February 20th, their concern became desperation. Pressured by relatives, the Ural Polytechnic Institute organized a search effort. Volunteers, many of them fellow students, set out into the snowy wilderness, retracing the group's planned route. The Soviet military soon joined the operation. Planes and helicopters scanned the icy landscape, Local police and militia combed the ground, but progress was slow. Snow was thick, the terrain treacherous, and visibility often poor. Then, on February 26th, a student volunteer named Mikhail Sharavin made a discovery that chilled him to his core. While searching along the eastern slope of Kholat Shakhl, Sharavin noticed a small patch of fabric poking out from under the snow. As he brushed away the powder, more fabric appeared, thick, beige canvas. It was the group's tent, collapsed and half buried. Sharavin used an ice axe to pry open the entrance, which was sealed shut with frozen snow. What he saw inside was baffling. The tent had been cut from the inside, several clean slashes slicing through the canvas, and while the tent was damaged, it wasn't chaotic. Most of the hikers' belongings were still inside, neatly arranged. Blankets and jackets were spread out methodically. Boots were lined along one side. A flashlight, dead but still set on top of gear as if it had been placed there deliberately. Maps, personal diaries, a few rubles in a tidy stack, and even a small flask of vodka sat untouched. In one corner there was a tin plate with slices of silo, left out, half-eaten, like someone had been fixing a snack just moments before everything fell apart. It didn't look like the tent had been ripped, apart by an external force. It looked like it had been abandoned, in a hurry, but not in chaos. It felt like someone had just gotten up and left mid-meal, Sharavin later said. It was like the scene was frozen in time. Outside the tent, the mystery deepened. Searchers found a line of footprints leading away from the tent. Not scattered, not running in panic, just 9 parallel tracks heading in a straight line down the slope. The prints were strange. Some were barefoot, others wore only socks. A few showed one shoe. And the detail was clear enough to see individual toe imprints in the hardened snow. The group hadn't run. They had walked quickly, maybe shuffled, maybe half stumbled, but in an organized, deliberate fashion, in a single direction. They were heading toward a nearby forest, about 500 meters downslope. The rescuers followed the trail until the tracks were swallowed by fresh snowfall. But what had driven 9 seasoned hikers to cut themselves out of their tent, in the middle of a snowstorm, and march into the woods wearing almost nothing? That question would only grow darker with what they found next. Perhaps they were trying to find shelter, or maybe regroup. But whatever they were doing, Sharavin and the others couldn't make sense of what they found. What could possibly cause experienced hikers, seasoned, well-prepared people, to abandon their tent in the dead of night, in freezing temperatures, half-dressed, barefoot, and calmly walk off into the darkness? It was late afternoon on February 26th, and the sky had already begun to dim. With nightfall approaching and temperatures dropping fast, the search teams were forced to pause until morning. But they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The scene they had uncovered so far didn't add up. It gnawed at them through the cold silence of the Siberian wilderness. The next morning, the search resumed. The rescuers fanned out from the torn, empty tent, heading downhill toward the forest. About a mile away, near the edge of the trees, under a towering Siberian cedar, Sharavin's group stumbled upon something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. There, near the blackened remains of a small fire, lay 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. Both were barefoot and dressed only in their underwear, curled near each other in the snow. Just beyond them, the cedar tree stood tall and silent, but its lower branches told a different story. Several of them were snapped off, up to 5 meters high. Bits of skin and torn clothing were found clinging to the bark. It looked like someone had climbed up the tree in a panic, maybe to spot the tent through the trees, maybe trying to escape from something. Either way, the effort had been frantic, desperate. Krivonishenko's corpse showed strange injuries. Parts of his body were burned and, most disturbing, a chunk of flesh was missing from his right hand. Later, forensic analysis suggested he had bitten into his own knuckle. Some speculated he had done it in agony, trying to stifle a scream, or maybe just to stay awake as hypothermia set in. Both men's hands and feet were swollen and discolored. deep, reddish-brown, the unmistakable sign of frostbite. The fire they had built had clearly not been enough. The branches from the cedar had been stripped for kindling, but what little flame they had managed was small, and by the time help arrived, it had long since died out. The image of those two, men, friends, huddled together under the towering cedar, half naked, freezing to death beside a dead fire, surrounded by nothing but snow and silence, was something the searchers wouldn't forget. Roughly 300 meters uphill, in the direction of the tent, they found another body. It was Igor Dyatlov, the leader of the group. He lay face up in the snow, his head pointed toward the tent, as if he had been crawling back to it when he died. He was more clothed than the others, wearing a flannel shirt, sweater, and pants, but still without a jacket or boots. His feet were only covered in socks. One of his arms was frozen in place, reaching upward toward the sky, clutching a thin birch branch. The other hand was tucked tightly against his chest. Some of the rescuers who saw his body later said it looked like he had been trying to protect something inside his coat, maybe a photograph or his notebook, but they didn't find anything significant near his heart. What struck them most was his face. It was oddly serene. His eyes were open, staring blankly through the layer of snow that had partially buried him. Not far from Dyatlov, they came across another body, that of Zinaida Zina Kolmogorova, the 22-year-old student. She was dressed a little warmer than Dyatlov, wearing 2 sweaters and 2 pairs of pants. But like the others, she had no boots, just socks. Her body was face down, pointed toward the tent, and her arms were stretched forward, bent at the elbows. It looked like she had been crawling, digging into the snow with everything she had, trying to reach the tent before the cold overtook her. Her face was bruised, and along her right side, they noticed a long, reddish mark, like she had been struck with something blunt, maybe the butt of a rifle or a heavy baton. But oddly, there were no other external injuries. It was as if whatever had hit her had done so cleanly and with force, leaving no other trace. It took another week before they found the last of the first 5 bodies. On March 5th, they discovered Rustam Slobodin. He was face down in the snow, about 480 meters from the cedar tree, roughly halfway back to the tent. Of the 5, he was the most warmly dressed. He wore a long-sleeved undershirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, and 4 layers of socks. On his right foot was a felt-lined boot. His left foot had only a sock. His head, though, was bare. In his right hand, Rustam still clutched a small pocket knife, closed. His body was stiff with the cold, but it told a story too, one of determination. An autopsy later revealed a long 7-inch fracture in his skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. It wasn't fatal, according to the medical examiner. They believed he might have sustained the injury in a fall, yet he'd managed to keep moving afterward, for perhaps another hour. Like the others, Rustam had been trying to get back, toward safety, toward the tent, toward life. And like the others, he hadn't made it. 5 bodies, each one telling its own silent, frozen story of terror, confusion, and final, futile struggle. And still, more remained missing. Ultimately, all 5 of the hikers initially found had died from hypothermia. None of them had life-threatening external injuries. No stab wounds, no gunshots, no signs of physical assault, just the cold, merciless grip of Siberia. Rustam Slobodin's watch was found shattered, its hands frozen at 8:45. Whether it stopped at 8:45 a.m. or p.m., or even on the day of their deaths, no one could say for certain, but it felt symbolic. Like time itself had simply stopped when whatever happened to them began. Now imagine being Yuri Yudin, the only member of the group who had turned back before the expedition went horribly wrong. Weeks later, he was called in to identify the bodies of his closest friends, one by one. When the first 5 corpses were airlifted to the morgue in Ivdel, Yuri stood there, heartbroken, staring at faces he'd shared laughter and dreams with just weeks before. He confirmed their identities. He did what had to be done, but that wasn't the end. 4 hikers were still missing. No one knew where they had gone, or if they were even still alive. Search teams kept scouring the area, day after day. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow began to melt under the growing warmth of the May sun. And then, nearly 3 months after the tragedy began, nature gave up its final horrific secret. On May 4th, a Mansi tribesman named Kurikov was helping the search effort, accompanied by his dog. The animal picked up a scent near a rocky ravine, deeper into the forest, about 75 meters past the cedar tree and 1.5 kilometers from the tent. There, in a snow-filled gully, searchers found scraps of torn clothing snagged on branches. They began to dig. Beneath nearly 4 meters of compacted snow, they found the remaining 4 bodies: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. They were lying close together at the bottom of the ravine, as if they had fallen or been forced down there together. Strikingly, 3 of them were better dressed than the others who had died earlier. It looked as though they had taken clothes from the dead in a desperate attempt to survive. Dubinina was found wearing Krivonyshenko's torn and burned brown pants, and her foot had been wrapped in a piece of his wool sweater. Zolotaryov, the Tsar 38-year-old instructor, wore Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. Kolevatov had on an extra sweater and pants, likely scavenged from someone else. This exchange of clothing was heartbreaking but understandable. It told a story of survival instinct. Cold calculation made in desperation. They stripped their fallen friends for warmth. There was no malice in it, just a last-ditch effort to stay alive. But what the searchers found next shattered any remaining hope of a logical explanation. Unlike the first 5, 3 of these final 4 victims had suffered devastating physical trauma. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol's skull was crushed, literally shattered, with a fracture nearly 8 inches long. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov both had massive internal chest injuries. Dubinina's ribs were broken, 10 in total, on both sides. Zolotaryov had 5 ribs fractured on one side. A forensic expert described the injuries as similar to what you'd expect in a high-speed car crash. The force needed to inflict that kind of internal damage would have been immense, something sudden, powerful, and with great pressure. And yet, none of these injuries had external marks. No cuts, no bruises, no torn skin. It was as if something had crushed them from the inside out, or compressed them with overwhelming force. But gently, somehow, without leaving a mark on the surface. Alexander Kolevatov's injuries were less dramatic, but still disturbing. His nose was broken. He had an open wound behind one ear, and his neck was strangely deformed. Still, none of those injuries were ruled fatal. It's believed he, too, died from hypothermia, possibly after being injured, perhaps unable to move anymore, quietly succumbing to the cold. And then came the most disturbing detail of all. All 4 bodies in the ravine had suffered gruesome damage to their faces. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, parts of her lips, and even some bone from her upper jaw. Zolotaryov's eyeballs were gone. Kolevatov had lost his eyebrows entirely. These were not injuries seen in the other bodies, and their graphic nature gave rise to a wave of terrifying theories. Some believed the group had been attacked by animals, by secret weapons, or even by something supernatural. People imagined a monstrous force that tore out eyes and tongues, that crushed bodies without leaving wounds, that stalked them in the snowy woods. But the medical experts had a simpler, if no less horrifying explanation. The 4 victims had been lying in a stream bed. Over the course of nearly 3 months, their bodies had been exposed to running water. Scavenging animals and natural decomposition likely caused the soft tissues of their faces to deteriorate. In Dubinina's case, her mouth may have been partially open, allowing water and bacteria to accelerate tissue loss. The clinical answer didn't ease the horror. Even if the soft tissue damage was explained away by time and nature, nothing could explain the totality of the scene. The crushed ribs, the shattered skull, the absence of struggle marks around the ravine, the bizarre, almost coordinated pattern of trauma, the mix of desperation, confusion, and unthinkable calm in how the bodies were found. It wasn't just death. It was a mystery woven into the snow, into the silence. Something had happened to those 9 people in the Urals. And even decades later, the world still doesn't know what. The autopsy findings were unsettling. In Lyudmila Dubinina's stomach, coroners discovered approximately 100 grams of coagulated blood. That detail alone hinted at something chilling. Her heart was still beating when her tongue was removed. This meant she was alive, at least for a few moments, as her body endured that mutilation. Investigators eventually leaned toward a less sensational explanation. Her injuries likely occurred after death. They speculated that scavenging animals or natural decomposition were responsible. Still, when the gruesome details became public, they ignited a storm of speculation. People couldn't help but wonder, was something darker behind it? Something violent, or even supernatural? And then there was Zolotaryov. When rescuers found his body, he still had a camera slung around his neck. Odd, because it wasn't one of the cameras accounted for in the tent. Even stranger, his hand was tightly clutching a pen, his fingers frozen around it, as though he had been trying to write something down in the moments before death. But the notepad was blank. Nothing was written. Whatever he saw or thought, whatever final truth he may have been trying to record, died with him. Back in 1959, investigators were desperate for answers. Because of the injuries involved, a criminal inquest was opened automatically. The first, suspicion fell on the indigenous Mansi people, who were native to the region and herded reindeer across the Ural Mountains. Authorities briefly considered whether the hikers had stumbled onto sacred ground and provoked a violent response. But that theory quickly crumbled. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, and no footprints around the tent or the bodies, except those made by the hikers themselves. In fact, the Mansi had actively participated in the search efforts. They were known to be peaceful and had no record of conflict with hikers. Next came the avalanche theory. It seemed like a logical explanation. An avalanche could explain the collapsed tent and the sudden rush of people outside without proper clothing. But the way the footprints trailed calmly away from the tent didn't match the panic of a real avalanche scenario. The tent hadn't been buried, just cut from the inside, and the injuries on the bodies didn't quite fit either. What about a wild animal attack? That idea was considered and then dismissed. No tracks from large animals were found. And the injuries, shattered ribs, missing eyes and tongue, didn't show signs of claw or teeth marks. Besides, predators don't usually attack in a pattern like this. The official line soon became clear. No one else had been involved. The Soviet authorities reluctantly concluded that the Dyatlov group had not been attacked by another person or group. And yet, some injuries still defied logic. One of the doctors involved in the investigation famously remarked that the damage to Dubinina and Zolotaryov's bodies was so severe, no human being could have inflicted it, not without weapons or an explosion. Then came a bizarre twist, something that felt ripped from a Cold War spy novel. Forensic analysts ran a Geiger counter over the hikers' clothing and found elevated levels of radiation, not on all the garments, but on specific pieces. Dubinina's brown sweater and Kolovatov's wool trousers showed unusual contamination. There was no reason ordinary hikers should be carrying radiation on their clothes. The discovery raised immediate red flags. Could the group have stumbled into a secret military experiment? Some kind of radioactive test? The radiation angle was only discovered because one investigator happened to have access to a Geiger counter, something not standard for a hiking-related death investigation. The results ignited even more speculation. What if the group had come into contact with a secret Soviet weapon? What if they'd been exposed to a leak from some classified chemical or nuclear site? Yet again, a more mundane explanation slowly emerged. Yuri Krivonishenko, one of the hikers, had previously worked at the Mayak nuclear facility. In 1957, he had helped clean up after a major accident known as the Kishtim disaster, one of the worst nuclear events in Soviet history. It was possible that his clothes were contaminated during that time and still carried faint traces of radiation. Another member, Alexander Kolevatov, had studied nuclear physics and worked at a classified research facility in Moscow. It wouldn't have been out of the question for some of their garments to pick up low-level contamination. So maybe the radiation meant nothing, just a strange coincidence. But not everyone was convinced. When the families of the deceased saw the bodies, many were disturbed by what they noticed. Several of the victims' skin had turned a deep, unnatural tan. Some had hair that appeared grey or even white. To the families, these were unmistakable signs of radiation sickness or chemical exposure. Evidence, they feared, of some cover-up. Authorities dismissed their concerns, stating that the skin discoloration was caused by exposure to the sun and cold. The hair color, they said, could change due to natural decomposition or even the embalming process. But these explanations didn't ease the suspicion. In an era of secrecy and distrust, especially under Soviet rule, families weren't inclined to believe the official story. By May of 1959, the investigation was wrapping up under increasing pressure to find closure. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov delivered a final report, but it was far from satisfying. He wrote that the hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force. That phrase, deliberately vague, was a bureaucratic shrug. It admitted the obvious. They had no idea what had happened. With no clear suspect, no known motive, and no definitive cause, the criminal case was closed. No one was charged. The files were stamped secret and buried in Soviet archives. The Dyatlov Pass Incident had come to an official end, but for the families, for curious minds around the world, and for anyone who's ever stared into a dark wilderness and wondered what's out there, it had only just begun. The area surrounding Dyatlov Pass was declared off limits for the next 3 years. Officially, it was to prevent further tragedies. Unofficially, many believe it was a move to keep prying eyes away. No more hikers, no more questions. The mountain was quiet again, but beneath that quiet, suspicion festered. For Wine's inquest ended with a single haunting line. The group died due to a compelling natural force. No explanation. No context. Just that. It didn't answer anything. It only deepened the mystery. 9 young lives were gone, and the families were left in the dark. In the rigid silence of the Soviet Union in 1959, that was the end of it. No room for doubt, no room for grief to question authority. But some parents refused to accept the official narrative. Zina Kolmogorova's mother spoke of quiet warnings. Threats, really, from local officials. Igor Dyatlov's parents were told outright, "You will never know the truth. Stop asking questions." The implication was clear. Pursue this, and you put yourself at risk. And in that time, when the KGB or the party told you to stop, you stopped. Fear wasn't abstract. It lived in every whispered conversation, every closed-door meeting. The families buried their children without answers. The mystery faded into shadows. A Cold War ghost story murmured in Ural classrooms and mountaineering clubs. But one person never let go. Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor. The 10th member of the expedition, he had turned back early due to illness. And he would carry the weight of that choice for the rest of his life. Survivor's guilt haunted him. He often said that he felt he should have died with his friends. But more than guilt, there was anger, a quiet fury that simmered for decades. He never accepted that a natural force had killed them. In his bones, he believed something man-made was behind it, something human, something cruel. In interviews, late in his life, just a few years before he passed away in 2013, Yudin became more vocal. He didn't speak in riddles anymore. He said plainly, "They were taken out of the tent at gunpoint. They were murdered. He believed the mutilation of Lyudmila Dubinina, especially the removal of her tongue, was deliberate. In his eyes, she was the boldest, the one who would have stood up to threats. He imagined her arguing, shouting, and being silenced forever. These were heavy accusations. Yudin admitted he had no proof, only instincts, and a lifetime of unanswered questions. But his words echo even now, because they show how deeply the mystery lodged itself in his soul. Whether he was right or wrong, he never stopped believing that the official story was a lie. Now here we are, decades later, and the Dyatlov Pass Incident still lingers like frostbite. I'm a modern investigator, working through grainy photographs, faded documents, and contradictory testimonies. Each clue is a fragment, each theory a fork in the road. And as I sift through it all, I feel the same chill they must have felt. The same wind, cutting across the slopes of Dead Mountain. What keeps the Dyatlov mystery alive isn't just the eerie setting or the strange deaths. It's that perfect storm of facts that don't quite fit together. The torn tent, the barefoot tracks in the snow, the blunt force injuries, the radiation, the strange lights reported in the sky, and the heavy-handed secrecy of the state. It's a story with too many strange edges to be smoothed out. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed, some rooted in science, others stretching into the paranormal or veering deep into conspiracy. We'll walk through each of these, one by one, but keep this in mind. Any theory worth considering must account for all the strange pieces, not just one or two, all of them. Let's begin with the theory that has, ironically, circled back to become the official explanation: the avalanche. Imagine this. It's the dead of night, February 1st. The hikers are sleeping in their tent, which they'd set up, on a slope. Not the safest spot, but they wanted to get past the tree line before dark. Suddenly, a heavy slab of snow above them fractures. There's no roaring wall of snow, no cinematic landslide, just a slab avalanche, fast, deadly, silent. It hits the tent, pressing down, making it impossible to breathe or move. In the panic, someone grabs a knife and slices through the tent wall. The entrance may have been buried or frozen shut. They crawl out into the freezing darkness, wearing whatever they had on, some in socks, others barefoot. The theory gained new life between 2019 and 2020. The Russian government reopened the case and, after investigation, concluded that a slab avalanche caused the deaths. That same year, a group of scientists ran simulations using snow physics and data from similar mountain environments and determined that such an event could indeed occur under the right conditions. The pressure from even a modest slab could cause the kind of internal injuries some of the hikers suffered, like crushed ribs and skull fractures, without leaving visible bruising. And under this lens, the group's actions make sense. Their panic wasn't irrational. They weren't fleeing some invisible enemy or supernatural force. They thought they were about to be buried alive. Getting out of the tent as fast as possible, without shoes or coats, could have felt like the only option. But this theory, like all the others, has gaps. We'll examine those next. For now, the avalanche gives us our first path forward, a way to understand at least some of what might have happened on that mountain. But is it the whole story? Or just another snow-covered truth, buried beneath decades of silence? What remained of the tent structure, panicking the group into thinking they were in immediate danger? Under this revised scenario, the group may not have been hit by a full avalanche at all. Instead, it might have been a smaller snow shift, perhaps a slab collapse or falling cornice, accompanied by the terrifying sound of breaking snow under tension. For people trained in mountain survival, those sounds alone could be enough to trigger evacuation instincts. Inside the cramped tent, the hikers might have been jolted awake by a deep crack and a shudder in the slope beneath them. Zolotaryov or Dyatlov could have shouted, "Slab's breaking, move!" Someone grabbed the knife. They didn't try to unzip the entrance. It was blocked or buried. A fast cut along the wall let them out. In seconds, they were scrambling down the slope, barefoot or in socks, hearts pounding, breath frosting in the air. By the time they reached the tree line, it was already well below freezing. They gathered branches and built a fire near the cedar. The charred remains of wood and burned fingertips suggest they tried to get as close as possible to the flame. Too close. Some climbed into the tree, snapping branches to use as firewood, or maybe trying to get a better view of the tent in the distance. Were they hoping to return? Others went further down to dig a snow shelter. It's here that the last 4 were found, branches laid across the snow, signs of someone trying to insulate the ground. These weren't the actions of panicked people, but trained ones, doing everything they could to survive. A classic bivouac setup. Unfortunately, the cold was too severe, and their gear, hats, gloves, coats, boots, was still up at the tent. The injuries seen in some of the bodies could also make sense under this theory. If Dubinina and Zolotaryov were in the ravine when their snow shelter collapsed under weight, their ribs might have been crushed by compacted snow. Researchers have modeled that a snow slab weighing several hundred kilograms, about the size of a car, could cause blunt force trauma equivalent to a car crash. It might explain why Dubinina's chest was crushed, why Zolotaryov's ribs broke inward with no external bruising. In 2021, a surprising contribution came from an unexpected source, the Disney movie Frozen. The snow physics algorithms developed for the film were repurposed by Swiss scientists for avalanche modeling. Using this animation tech, they simulated how a small but dense slab could injure someone lying flat inside a tent. The data supported the idea that Dyatlov group members could have sustained those injuries from a relatively modest avalanche or snow load, without the tent being obliterated. Still, the avalanche theory, even with these modern twists, doesn't answer everything. Rescuers found the tent partially collapsed but not destroyed. Only a thin layer of snow covered it. The skis used as structural supports were still upright. If snow had slammed into the tent with deadly force, the tent should have been flattened, equipment scattered. Yet food, boots, and coats were still arranged inside. This suggests that the tent wasn't violently swept away, but abandoned quickly and under pressure. Then there's the footprints. Clear, uninterrupted prints were found leading away from the tent. Not dragged marks or scuffs, but clean tracks, some barefoot, others in socks or a single boot, preserved in the frozen crust. If a heavy slab or further snowfall had occurred after the group fled, those prints would have been wiped out. The fact that they remained visible for over 500 meters is hard to reconcile with a major avalanche event. Skeptics also highlight the slope itself. The incline where the tent was pitched measured about 30 degrees on the lower end of avalanche-prone terrain, and the area doesn't have the deep cuts and debris chutes typical of regular avalanche zones. Several experienced mountaineers who visited the site insist it doesn't feel like avalanche country. Weather records from that night don't show a massive dump of fresh snow or rapid warming conditions, factors that usually precede an avalanche. Could wind loading alone have destabilized a slab? Possibly. Some proponents argue that snowdrift from strong winds might have created just enough pressure to fracture a section, but this remains speculative. To account for the lack of full burial and the absence of scattered debris, some avalanche theorists have proposed refined versions of the event. One variation is a collapsing snow cornice, an overhanging ledge of hardened snow breaking loose above the tent. This could have slammed down suddenly, making a terrifying sound, crushing part of the tent, and creating the illusion of a full avalanche. If it happened at night, in a whiteout, or under strong winds, it might have sounded like death was coming for them. Another theory posits a katabatic wind event, a rare but violent burst of dense cold air that can surge down a mountain slope without warning. These winds have been recorded in places like Antarctica and Greenland, slamming tents flat and even tossing gear. A sudden downdraft could have mimicked the sensation of a coming avalanche, ripping through the pass, slamming the tent and chilling them to the bone. With visibility low and noise overwhelming, the hikers might have believed snow was about to bury them. Even if the avalanche or wind theories don't tick every box, they do explain many behaviors that once seemed irrational. Slashing the tent, fleeing half naked, building a fire, trying to shelter in a ravine, all consistent with people reacting to a perceived imminent threat. Still, we're left with loose threads. The radiation on Dubinina's and Kolovatov's clothing, the missing tongue, the grey hair, the tan skin, the camera found on Zolotaryov, which wasn't listed in group inventories, the fact that he clutched a pencil and notepad in his final moments, but wrote nothing. Even the official avalanche theory requires a cascade of coincidences to align just right. Slab snow breaks loose, hits the tent but doesn't bury it. Experienced hikers panic, flee improperly dressed, don't return, even though the tent remains accessible. They suffer bizarre injuries and die miles from camp. It's not impossible, but it leaves room for doubt, and doubt is where mystery thrives. The tent and force them out. In 2020, Russian investigators officially concluded that the Dyatlov Pass deaths were caused by an avalanche. They seemed confident in this explanation and closed the case again. To many scientists, this conclusion made sense. It explained most of the physical evidence in a straightforward way. But despite how neat and logical it sounded, the avalanche theory still left behind a lot of strange, nagging questions. Why was there radioactivity on the hikers' clothing? What about the orange orbs people reported seeing in the sky that night? And why had the Soviet government been so secretive even decades later? The avalanche theory might explain how they died, but it doesn't explain why. To explore those questions, we have to look elsewhere, specifically into the shadows of the Cold War. It was 1959. The Soviet Union was deep in the Cold War, locked in a constant arms race with the United States. Secret weapons tests, experimental rockets, and classified operations were common across the remote areas of the country. And Dyatlov Pass, though remote, wasn't terribly far from Baikonur Cosmodrome, the USSR's primary rocket launch site. Other military zones were scattered throughout the Urals. So, it's not hard to imagine that the hikers may have wandered into a forbidden area, one where something dangerous and top secret was being tested. This leads us to one of the most persistent, alternate theories, that the hikers were accidentally caught in a Soviet military experiment. There are several versions of this idea, but the most widely discussed involves parachute mines, air-dropped explosives that descend slowly on parachutes before detonating just above ground. In this scenario, the Dyatlov group had set up their tent on the slopes of Dead Mountain on the night of February 1st. Unbeknownst to them, the Soviet military was conducting an aerial weapons test nearby. Maybe they were testing parachute mines. Maybe it was something even more experimental. Either way, the hikers were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Imagine it, the dead of night, a deafening boom in the sky, followed by brilliant orange flashes cutting through the darkness. The hikers jolt awake, terrified and confused. Were they under attack? Was an avalanche about to be triggered? With no time to spare, they slashed their way out of the tent from the inside, desperate to escape. Some fled without boots, without jackets, with nothing but their base layers. That panic wasn't irrational. It was survival instinct. They may have thought they were being bombed. The first to die were likely the ones found near the cedar tree. They succumbed to hypothermia, in the freezing cold. The others, more desperate now, scavenged what they could from the bodies. Clothing, boots, any chance at warmth. They pressed on, seeking shelter in the ravine. Then came the second wave. If more parachute mines detonated in the area, perhaps even directly above the ravine where the surviving hikers took cover, the concussive force could have crushed them internally. This would explain the horrific but strangely bloodless injuries found on some of the bodies. Massive internal trauma, broken ribs, shattered skulls, but almost no external bruising or wounds. Exactly the kind of damage that Dubinina, Zolotaryov, and Thibaut Brignol had. These kinds of injuries match what's known about parachute mine trauma, violent pressure waves that tear apart the inside of the body while leaving the skin mostly intact. Soviet records do confirm that parachute mine testing occurred in the Urals in early 1959, including in February. And then there are the fireballs. Another group of hikers, camped roughly 50 kilometers to the south, reported seeing glowing orange spheres drifting through the sky on the night of February the 1st. Local residents, a team of meteorologists, and even soldiers later reported similar sightings in February and March of that year. Fireballs, floating lights, silent aerial objects glowing against the black winter sky. These could easily have been flares, high-altitude aircraft, or the parachute mines themselves descending before detonation. Even Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator of the Dyatlov case, later admitted that his team had seen strange lights during their fieldwork. In his notes, he called them peculiar flying spheres. But according to Ivanov, Soviet authorities pressured him to remove all mention of those sightings from the official report. He complied. That smells like a cover-up. Then there's the radiation. 2 of the hikers had elevated levels of radioactive isotopes on their clothes. The official explanation is vague. But if the hikers had stumbled upon the aftermath of a failed radiological test, say a broken missile stage, or even a prototype nuclear device, it would make sense. Some parts of Cold War tech used radioactive components. Even being near such debris could have contaminated them. Another theory suggests they weren't just near it, they came into contact with it. Maybe they unknowingly touched wreckage or set up camp too close. The orange tint of their skin and the grey hair found on at least one body have led some to suspect exposure to a chemical or radioactive agent. In the most extreme version of the theory, the group didn't just stumble. Upon a test, they were exposed to an experimental chemical or radiological weapon, something that had never been revealed to the public. Was it intentional? Probably not. But once Soviet officials realized what had happened, covering it up would have been the only option. This isn't just wild speculation. It fits the strange puzzle pieces the avalanche theory leaves behind. The lights in the sky, the internal, injuries without wounds, the radiation, the missing documentation, the silence from the government. One theory even goes further, suggesting that the hikers weren't simply victims, but were silenced to keep the secret buried. That part remains unproven. But in a nation buried in secrecy, where soldiers were, sworn to silence and accidents disappeared into locked archives, it's hard not to wonder. They were subjects in a KGB experiment, at least that's what some people believe. The theory goes that the hikers were unknowingly caught in a test involving a sonic weapon or some kind of nerve gas. The effects were so disorienting, so psychologically disturbing, that they fled the tent in a frenzy, hallucinating and terrified. It would explain their chaotic behavior, the lack of external injuries, and the eerie expressions some had when found. But let's be honest, these ideas are speculative at best. For one, if a radioactive dispersal device had really been used, it would likely have contaminated all the hikers and their belongings, not just a couple of garments. The radiation found on a few pieces of clothing doesn't point to a large-scale release. And as for the orange-tinted skin and greyish hair, most experts believe those changes came from natural mummification. After all, the bodies were exposed to sub-zero temperatures, wind and sun for weeks, even months. Still, it's the secrecy that keeps people suspicious. Back then, under Soviet rule, the suppression of information was routine. Any accident or event with potential links to military technology was automatically buried under layers of classification. So the hush-hush treatment of the Dyatlov case wasn't necessarily unique, but it was consistent with how the government operated when it had something to hide. That said, the military testing theory still feels uncomfortably plausible to many. It addresses a lot: the mysterious lights seen in the sky, the internal injuries, the patches of radiation, and the rapid sealing of the investigation. And there are certain details that just don't sit right. For instance, why were search and rescue teams carrying Geiger counters in the first place? That's not standard protocol for a missing persons case in the mountains. Maybe it was because someone already suspected a radioactive source, and it wasn't just anyone in the search party. The man leading it was from the Ural Polytechnical Institute's radiological lab. He knew what he was doing. Why was he even involved unless radiation was already a concern? Then there's the fact that the entire region around the incident was closed off for 3 years. 3? That's a long time to cordon off a remote slope, unless something dangerous or politically sensitive was left behind, something they didn't want discovered. And then there's Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator. Decades later, he admitted publicly that he believed some kind of UFO or experimental weapon was involved. He also claimed he had been pressured by higher-ups to omit those possibilities from the official report. He wasn't just some fringe theorist, he was the man in charge. Families of the victims have also long believed the truth was hidden from them. Some even suspected military involvement from the start. Over the years, their suspicions have only deepened, especially as more odd details have surfaced. Which brings us to one of the darker offshoots of this theory, a version that reads more like a Cold War spy thriller than a mountaineering tragedy. According to a 2013 book by Russian author Alexei Rakitin, at least some members of the Dyatlov group were actually KGB operatives. The most often mentioned is Semyon Zolotaryov, though some point fingers at Alexander Kolevatov or even Yuri Krivonishenko. Rakitin's theory suggests the hiking expedition was a cover for an undercover mission. Here's how the story goes. The supposed KGB agents were tasked with meeting American CIA contacts somewhere in the Ural Mountains. Their job? Deliver fake radioactive samples that would mislead US intelligence about the Soviet Union's nuclear capabilities. But something went horribly wrong. Maybe the Americans realized it was a setup. Maybe there was a third party watching. Maybe the KGB had second thoughts about leaving any loose ends. In any case, according to this version of the tale, all 9 hikers were silenced, eliminated to keep the operation from exposure. Wild, right? But here's where it gets eerie. Some of the background facts do raise eyebrows. Yuri Krivonishenko had worked at a nuclear facility that experienced a serious accident and had been involved in its cleanup. Semyon Zolotaryov was a war veteran who joined the trip at the last minute under strange circumstances. He insisted people call him Alexander, not Semyon, a bizarre request that confused the others. Even their burials raise questions. Both Krivonishenko and Zolotaryov were interred in closed, prestigious cemeteries, usually reserved for VIPs or individuals with state ties. Was that just coincidence? Or a quiet nod from the government for services rendered? Services that had to be kept secret? There's no hard proof of this spy plot, of course. But the story lingers because it offers explanations for some of the incident's most bizarre threads. The radiation, the secrecy, the seemingly inexplicable decisions of some group members. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that this tragedy didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened during a time when espionage, counterintelligence, and covert operations were part of daily life. So maybe the Dyatlov group stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see. A missile test, a crash site, a mobile nuclear unit, and maybe the KGB decided that letting them live was too great a risk. That's what some of the families believe. They've said for decades that their children saw something they shouldn't have and paid the price. It's a chilling accusation, but given the secrecy and fear that defined the Cold War, it's not completely out of the question. Still, not everyone believes the cause was human. Now, let's shift away from spies and secret weapons and take a look at a different, yet equally strange theory, one grounded not in politics or conspiracy, but in the invisible forces of nature. It's called infrasound, and it might have driven the hikers mad. In 2013, American researcher Donnie Eichar proposed a strange but scientifically grounded explanation for the Dyatlov Pass mystery, one that didn't involve murder, monsters, or military cover-ups. Instead, he suggested that a rare natural phenomenon might have triggered the hikers' sudden panic. His theory revolved around the specific geography of the mountain pass and the wind conditions on the night of February 1st, 1959. According to Eichar, the shape of the mountain and the intense winds that evening could have created what's known as a Kármán vortex street, a pattern of swirling air vortices that form behind a structure in the wind. Under the right conditions, these vortices can generate a low-frequency sound called infrasound, a kind of hum that humans can't consciously hear but can definitely feel. At certain frequencies, infrasound has been shown to cause feelings of unease, anxiety, and even panic. Some people feel pressure in their chest, nausea, or a creeping sense of dread. It can be so intense that people genuinely believe they're in danger without any clear reason. Now imagine this. The wind begins howling over the pass that night. Inside the tent, the hikers finish dinner and settle down, trying to rest in the bitter cold. Slowly, the infrasound builds, imperceptible at first, but growing stronger. The air itself begins to vibrate at just the wrong frequency. Someone stirs, then another. A subtle unease creeps in, tightening their chests. One of them whispers, "I don't feel right." Another says he can't breathe. Someone might have screamed, "The tent, it's closing in on us." The fear isn't logical. There's nothing to see, no enemy to fight, but it's overwhelming. Panic sets in, not the kind that comes from being chased, but the kind that makes your heart race for no reason at all. In desperation, they slash open the side of the tent and spill into the night. Snow crunches under bare feet. The cold cuts deep, but right now, getting away from whatever is in the tent feels more urgent than freezing to death. They run, not wildly, not screaming, but in a kind of dazed confusion. The footprints rescuers later found show that they walked, not ran. This supports Icar's theory. They weren't fleeing from something chasing them. The fear was inside them, impossible to shake. Once they reached the shelter of the tree line, the wind patterns would have changed. The infrasound would stop. Suddenly, the panic lifts. They're left blinking at one another in the dark, breath steaming in the freezing air. They're cold, barely dressed, miles from their tent. And now they understand the danger they're really in. Trying to survive, they light a small fire beneath the cedar trees. Doroshenko and Krivonishenko stay close, trying to warm themselves, but the fire dies, and with it, their chance at survival. They freeze where they sit. Meanwhile, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin decide to head back toward the tent. Maybe they think they can make it. Maybe they hope to retrieve clothes or supplies, but it's pitch black. The temperature is 20 degrees C or lower. They never make it. Their bodies are later found in various stages of collapse, one of them with a fractured skull, likely from a fall in the dark. The last group of 4 retreats deeper into the woods. They try to dig a snow shelter, a trench or cave that might offer protection. It's possible that, in their weakened state, they misjudged the terrain. 2 of them may have fallen into a hidden ravine, or their shelter collapsed on top of them. The crushing injuries they suffered, broken ribs, smashed skulls, suggest a significant impact, but no external trauma that would point to an attack. Icar's theory paints a haunting picture, not of violence, but of nature playing a terrifying trick on the mind. The mountain didn't need claws or weapons. It used wind and sound to turn rational people into frightened animals. And once they regained their senses, it was too late. Importantly, this theory explains the strangest part of the case. Why they left the safety of their tent without shoes, or jackets in the middle of a Siberian night. It also lines up with the footprints, walking, not running, and the fact that no external threat was found. But not everyone is convinced. Skeptics point out that infrasound's effects, while real, aren't usually that extreme. There are documented cases, especially in supposed haunted locations, where low-frequency vibrations have caused people to feel uneasy or even experience hallucinations. But there are no confirmed cases of entire groups losing their minds to it, at least not like this. Icar's theory depends on a lot of things happening just right. The wind speed, the shape of the pass, the timing. It's a delicate chain of what-ifs. Still, it's one of the more grounded explanations. It doesn't rely on secret weapons or conspiracies, just weather, physics, and bad luck. Of course, not everyone wants a scientific explanation. Some prefer a more fantastical one, something bigger, stranger, Could it have been a creature, an unknown beast of the mountains? The Yeti theory, as it's come to be called, might sound like tabloid nonsense, but it has real believers. The region has long been home to legends about a wild man or snow creature that roams the forested slopes. Even the hikers made light of it. In one of their journals, they jokingly referred to their route as the route of the snowman. And then there's that photo, frame 17, from a recovered roll of film. It's blurry, hard to interpret, but it shows a tall, dark figure standing among the trees, far in the distance. No one knows what it is. Some say it's one of the hikers. Others claim it's the last image ever taken of something not human watching them. Some claim that the group encountered a menk, the Siberian version of a yeti, a towering, hairy creature said to haunt the remote mountain forests. Could it be that such a beast approached their tent that night, triggering a wave of terror so overwhelming they slashed their way out and fled half-dressed into the freezing dark? Some versions of the theory even suggest the creature followed them into the woods, causing the injuries that later baffled investigators. It's a wild idea, but what actual evidence exists? Not much. Almost none, in fact. First, no tracks from any creature were found at the scene. The only footprints in the snow belonged to the 9 hikers. No giant prints, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no tufts of fur. If a creature had attacked, you'd expect to find at least some physical trace. Claw marks on the tent, drag trails, torn clothing, but nothing like that was ever reported. In fact, the tent had been cut from the inside, not ripped open, by force. And the injuries? Yes, some of them were brutal, but none of them matched an animal attack. There were no puncture wounds, no bite marks, no claw gashes. No signs the hikers had tried to fight something off. Predators in that region, like bears, would have been in hibernation in February. Wolves don't hunt humans without leaving traces. There was one curious detail. Some scratches on Zolotaryov's body that vaguely resembled claw marks, but they were shallow and could easily have come from brushing past tree branches or sharp ice. Still, in the imagination, it's easy to build a terrifying scenario. Picture the group lying in their tent when they hear something strange outside. A heavy thud in the snow, or a deep guttural sound unlike anything they've ever heard. Maybe they see a massive shadow looming through the fabric, or hear a scream echoing from the trees. There's a legend among the local Mansi people of a forest giant that walks the night. Panic sets in. Someone yells. They grab knives and slice their way out, stumbling into the snow, scattered in all directions. Some even point to the gruesome detail that Lyudmila Dubinina's tongue was missing, suggesting the creature tore it out. But forensic examiners noted there were no signs of blood around the wound. More likely, it was lost after death, through decomposition or animal scavenging. And the trace amounts of radiation found on some of the clothes. Some use this to argue the creature was somehow radioactive, even tying it into UFO theories. But all of this lives in the realm of speculation. TV documentaries, internet forums, urban legend. American skeptic and researcher Benjamin Radford reviewed the so-called Russian Yeti hypothesis and concluded there's simply no hard evidence to support it. A natural event, like an avalanche or environmental panic, fits the facts much more closely. Still, the cryptid theory refuses to die. Maybe it's the eerie setting, the remote mountain, the snowy silence, the unknown, the idea of a primal predator, intelligent, ancient, lurking in the woods, adds a layer of psychological horror that's hard to shake. Rational or not, it haunts the imagination. And if we're talking about psychological horror, there's another theory, one that's even darker, more insidious. What if the Dyatlov hikers were unwitting test subjects in a secret psychological or military experiment? This theory overlaps with the idea of Soviet military involvement, but deserves its own space. During the Cold War, both the US and the USSR were known to carry out ethically questionable experiments. MK-Ultra with LSD, Soviet sleep deprivation studies, exposure to radiation or chemical agents. Could the hikers have been part of such a test? Not knowingly, of course, but perhaps they were chosen precisely because they were young, educated, and isolated. One version of the theory suggests they were exposed to a hallucinogen, something slipped into their food or water, or released through the stove. Others propose they were subjected to a chemical agent, an aerosolized gas designed to trigger fear, confusion, even hysteria, something synthetic and subtle, with no smell or color. There's even a kernel of support for this idea, how quickly and aggressively the Soviet authorities took control of the case. Dozens of searchers were deployed, including soldiers and KGB agents. When the bodies were found, senior pathologists were sent in from Moscow. A strange move for what was officially considered a simple hiking accident. Some reports say internal organs were removed for secret analysis, though that's never been confirmed. The case files? Immediately classified. Then there are the stories, fragments of rumor mostly. A few members of the rescue team reportedly acted strangely. One student rescuer had a complete breakdown after returning from the site and refused to ever speak about it again. Was he just traumatized by what he saw, or was there something more? These unsettling gaps fuel the idea that the hikers were part of a controlled test. Maybe not even the kind that was supposed to be lethal, but something went wrong. They were pushed too far. The weather was too harsh. The experiment backfired. Other versions get even more specific. Maybe the group was caught in a weapons test, an infrasound generator designed to induce fear. That ties back to Icar's earlier natural theory, except this time it's man-made. Perhaps the goal was to see if fear-inducing frequencies could break a person's will or confuse their senses. The Dyatlov hikers, isolated in the middle of nowhere, would have been the perfect targets. Then there's the idea of a blinding light weapon, perhaps flares or illumination bombs dropped as part of a war game, flashing lights, sudden booms, not meant to kill, but to confuse. The kind of chaos that might drive people from their shelter, stumbling into the snow, only to die from the cold. A secret training exercise gone too far. One lesser-known theory posits that the group accidentally stumbled into a parachute mine test, high-altitude explosives dropped by planes. If they witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, special forces might have been sent to neutralize the situation, not with bullets, but by scaring them into the elements, making their deaths look like an accident. A cold, calculated method of silencing witnesses. Yes, this too is highly speculative, conjecture stacked on coincidence. But when faced with the chilling silence of that snowy slope, and the odd details of the case that remain unexplained, people will reach for whatever stories help them make sense of it all. And sometimes, the scariest theories aren't about monsters at all. They're about human beings, hidden agendas, and the terrible things done in the name of progress or power. Consider this. Among the 4 hikers who were found last, 3 suffered devastating fatal injuries, but one, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, had no such trauma. If something like an explosion or collapse had caused those injuries, then Kolovatov's lack of wounds suggests he either died by another means or survived longer than the others. That's the kind of detail that leads people to dark speculation. What if one of the hikers survived for hours or even days and was silenced before rescuers arrived? There's no hard evidence for that. Every one of the 9 hikers was officially declared dead when their bodies were found. But when you start thinking about Soviet-era secrecy, strange military projects, and classified experiments, your mind goes to eerie places. Could someone have finished them off? Could a few have still been alive, only to vanish into some KGB file no one ever opened again? It sounds like a conspiracy theory because, frankly, it is, and it's not exactly supported by the known facts. But if this was an experiment, it would have been one of the cruelest ever conducted in Soviet history. And for what? To test how young students would react to pure terror. Some speculate that a few members, like Zolotaryov or Krivonishenko, may have been involved in secret government work, while the rest were unfortunate collateral damage in a deadly operation. That's where the secret experiment theory gains traction. It ties everything together. The orange lights in the sky? Maybe military flares? The panic? Possibly induced by some kind of gas or infrasound? The massive internal injuries without? Visible external trauma? Could be from sonic weapons or experimental blasts. The trace amounts of radiation on some clothing. Perhaps exposure to a classified material. And of course, the tight-lipped handling of the entire investigation fits if the whole thing was classified. It's a theory that explains a lot in one swoop, but demands belief in something deeply sinister. That the Soviet government intentionally sent 9 young people to die in the Ural Mountains, and then covered it all up without a trace. That kind of ruthlessness isn't unthinkable, considering Soviet history. But there's no smoking gun, just scattered clues and gut feelings. In the end, no single theory holds everything together. Some explain the tense, sudden evacuation. Others account for the odd injuries. A few make sense of the lights in the sky or the bizarre autopsy results. Maybe the truth is this. It wasn't just one thing. Maybe it was a deadly mix. Natural forces colliding with human action. Some recent researchers have proposed exactly that. Imagine this. A small slab avalanche crushes part of the tent, forcing the hikers to flee in panic. But while they're stumbling through the snow, they see military flares in the sky. Maybe they hear distant explosions. A shockwave rolls across the valley. Some are thrown, injured. Others keep moving. It's chaos, cold, silent, and terrifying. Or maybe the source of their panic wasn't visible. Perhaps it was sound. A low, rumbling infrasound produced by wind over the mountain. A known phenomenon that can cause nausea, panic, and overwhelming dread. That might explain why trained hikers fled into the night without shoes or gear. Then, while huddling under a tree for warmth, they hear another distant boom, the re-entry of a Soviet rocket or missile. The sonic force breaks bones, sends shockwaves through the forest. Some of them might even have been hit by falling debris. It's not hard to imagine a perfect storm of fear, weather, and bad luck. One that starts with a minor avalanche, escalates with unexpected military testing, and ends in freezing darkness. And let's not forget, the official Soviet report listed the cause of death as an unknown compelling force. Who says that force had to be one thing? Still, there were those glowing orange lights in the sky. Dismissed in 1959, later confirmed by several witnesses. There's the unsettling fact that some of the bodies had oddly tanned skin and grey hair. Possibly natural effects from decomposition or cold, but strange nonetheless. And then there's the cryptic comment made to one of the families by a local official. You'll never know the truth. Maybe the most chilling part came decades later. In 1990, Lev Ivanov, the lead Soviet investigator, admitted that his team had seen something they couldn't explain. Flying spheres in the night sky. And that higher-ups told him to leave that part out of the report. That confession lingers. If even Soviet investigators whispered about unknown objects in the sky, what did they think happened out there? I keep returning to one image. It plays in my mind like a scene from a slow, silent film. 9 young figures moving across snow, their outlines flickering in a cold, shifting orange light. Snow whipping sideways, stinging their skin. Their voices, lost in the wind. Ludmila Dubinina pushing the group forward, determined despite the cold. Igor Dyatlov trying to stay calm, keep the others together. Zina Kolmogorova mumbling a prayer through chattering teeth. And young Yuri Krivonishenko maybe cracking a weak joke to keep spirits up, even as his hands turned blue with frostbite. I see them gathered under that cedar tree, faces drawn, eyes reflecting the flickering light of a small struggling fire, looking up at the sky, not just at stars, but at something they didn't understand. A light, a sound, a fear that they couldn't explain. 9 people went into the mountains that night, and something beyond our understanding, ensured they never came back. But the story continues to send a shiver down the spine of anyone who hears it, not just because of what might have happened, but because of what was never explained. It's the uncertainty that haunts us most. We're drawn to the Dyatlov Pass mystery, not simply to solve it, but to feel that chilling edge between the known and the unknowable. There's something deeply human about standing on the border of the ordinary and the extraordinary, staring into the cold, dark unknown. These weren't amateurs. They were smart, capable, physically fit students, people who loved adventure and had done this kind of thing before. What happened to them wasn't some reckless accident on a casual hike. They set out on a skiing expedition, something thousands of Russians do every year, and yet they ended up as frozen figures in the snow, their bodies twisted in fear and confusion, laid out in a scene that reads like the last page of a horror novel. After following every lead, dissecting every piece of evidence, and analysing every theory, from avalanches and infrasound to military experiments and alien encounters, we're still left with more questions than answers. The Soviet government's original conclusion was vague, that the hikers died from a compelling, natural force. But what does that even mean? Was it nature, or was it the cost of guarding something darker? As one author put it, maybe what happened up there wasn't an accident. Maybe it was the price of silence, the cost of protecting secrets. And if that's true, then perhaps the truth was never lost in the snow. It was buried there, on purpose, just like the last bodies. We may never know for sure what happened in those icy hills, but just imagine lying in your bed tonight, eyes closed, trying to sleep. Outside, the wind picks up. Now imagine you're up on that mountain. Picture the endless white around you, the cold so deep it bites your bones. The crunch of boots in, snow suddenly stopping. Then, silence, heavy, final. Each theory has its followers, and each has its critics. Even now, new ideas are still emerging. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case. They looked at the evidence again, and they closed it once more, with the same verdict: avalanche. But not everyone's buying that, not after everything we've learned. The debate rages on, like the howling wind across that cursed ridge, because whatever happened on Dyatlov Pass, it was never meant to be found. Some believe what happened there is tied to information that was classified so deeply it will never see the light of day. Maybe it involved experiments that were never supposed to reach public ears. Or maybe it was something more terrifying, something from outside our current understanding of reality. And on nights like this, those theories don't feel so far-fetched. Daniel, cross-shot upright in bed, his skin soaked with sweat, sheets tangled around his legs like restraints. His heart was pounding. That dream again, more vivid this time. He could still see it. The long metallic tunnel underground, the blue lights pulsing like a heartbeat, the cold metal chair, leather straps wrapped around his wrists, and the voices, always the voices, echoing in the concrete chambers. Subject 17 shows elevated response. Neural amplitude increased by 30%. He rubbed his face, trying to breathe. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then he noticed the television. It was on, flickering with static. He was sure, absolutely sure, he had turned it off before going to sleep. But now it hissed softly in the dark, the screen filled with dancing grey pixels. At first, it was just noise. But then, the sound changed. A hum began. Low, rhythmic, pulsing just beneath the range of hearing. It wasn't loud, but Daniel felt it, in his skull, like something knocking gently on the inside of his mind, trying to get out. Drawn like a moth to flame, he stepped closer. There were patterns in the static, shapes, lines, not random, geometric forms that seemed too precise to be natural. Impossible angles, spirals, glyphs, like ancient language buried in white noise. Then he saw his reflection in the screen, and it wasn't him. It looked like him. Same face, same tired eyes, but something about it was off. The expression, the way the reflection didn't blink when he did. It was like another person, staring back, watching. He heard himself whisper, without thinking, Delta Protocol 17. Initiate phase. The words tumbled from his mouth before he even understood them. They came from somewhere deep inside, like a memory unearthed. The static surged, becoming sharper, louder. The hum rose to a whine that made his teeth hurt, a high-pitched screech that drilled into his fillings. He stumbled back, clutching his ears. And then, silence. The screen went black. Daniel stood alone in the darkness, trembling. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but he didn't know why. By morning, he had convinced himself it was nothing more than a vivid nightmare. Stress, he told himself. Maybe sleep paralysis. Something his brain cooked up after too much late-night reading. But as he leaned over the sink to brush his teeth, he caught something odd in the mirror. A small red mark right behind his ear. Perfectly round. Like a puncture wound. Faded, but clean. He ran his fingertip over it. No pain. No memory of how it got there. Days passed, and the dreams didn't stop. Each night, he returned to that place. The underground facility. The endless corridors. The silver door that led to the chair. The scientists with blank faces. The clipboard notes and electrodes. The voice over the intercom that never had a source. In the dreams, he was a child again. 11, maybe 12. Wearing a hospital gown. Afraid to speak. But there was something else. A recurring image that started to slip through the background. Almost unnoticed at first. A mountain ridge. Jagged. Snow-covered. With orange lights floating in the sky above it. The same ridge, every time, the same orange glow, just like the one described in the Dyatlov reports. A jagged silhouette rose in Daniel's mind every time he closed his eyes. A towering radar dish set against a fading sky. It haunted him. When he wasn't at work coding high-level security, algorithms for a defense contractor, he found himself sketching the same image over and over, on napkins, scrap paper, his apartment walls. The structure loomed in each drawing, always from slightly different angles. Sometimes it overlooked a curved coastline. Other times it was framed by strange symbols, odd runes his hand scribbled unconsciously. It didn't feel like art. It felt like memory. Martin, a co-worker and the closest thing Daniel had to a friend, noticed first. "You look like hell, Dan," he said one afternoon as they sat in the break room, plastic trays of bland cafeteria food between them. Daniel rubbed the shadows under his eyes. "Haven't been sleeping much." Martin leaned in. "Weird dreams again?" Daniel hesitated. "Yeah, I don't know. There's this facility by the ocean, a radar tower." Martin's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "What kind of tower?" Daniel blinked, surprised at the answer already forming in his head. "An FPS-35, Cold War era, huge thing, has this distinctive cowling." Martin lowered his fork. "That's really specific. You sure this is just a dream?" "I think so." Daniel's voice dropped. "But it feels more like a memory. And there's more. When there's static on the TV, I hear something. Some kind of signal." "What kind of signal? Words?" "No, not speech. More like a pulse. A beacon. Like it's calling me." Martin stared at him for a long moment. "Have you ever heard of Camp Hero? Out in Montauk?" The name hit Daniel like a jolt of electricity. He flinched. His coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the tile floor. The dark liquid spreading toward Martin's shoes. "Jesus, Dan, you okay?" Daniel didn't answer. He was staring past the broken cup, into nothing. "I need to go there." The drive to Long Island took just over 4 hours. Daniel barely remembered it. The farther east he went, the heavier his chest felt, like gravity itself deepened. As he passed the sign for Montauk Township, pressure started to build behind his eyes. Not quite pain, more like the moment before a sneeze that never comes. The roads narrowed. Pine forests loomed close on either side. Twice his GPS lost signal, but Daniel didn't need it. His hands moved on, their own, turning the wheel with quiet certainty down remote paths and forgotten side roads. He wasn't navigating, he was remembering. The trees thinned, giving way to scrubland and wind-swept cliffs. Then, there it was, rising like a relic from his dreams, the radar tower of Camp Hero. Exactly as he'd drawn it, dozens of times. It stood massive and still against a pale, cloudless sky. Below it, concrete bunkers and decaying military buildings sprawled across the land, weather-worn remnants of a war that never came. A rusted sign near the entrance read, Camp Hero State Park, Esther 2002. But something felt off. The chain-link fence looked newer than it should, too new. The security cameras were clean, functional, watching. He parked in the nearly empty lot and walked toward the visitor center, a squat, green-painted building, its paint peeling in long flakes. Inside, a bored-looking park ranger sat at the desk, a crossword puzzle in front of her. "Closing in an hour," she said without looking up. Daniel approached slowly, trying to steady his breath. "I was hoping you could tell me a bit about the place, its history." She pushed a folded pamphlet toward him without much interest. "Standard Cold War radar station, shut down in the early 70s, self-guided tour maps inside." He picked it up. "What about the underground sections?" The ranger's pencil stopped mid-word. Her eyes finally met his. "There aren't any open to the public, but they exist." She leaned back slightly. "Look, this is just an old base. If you're one of those conspiracy guys..." "I've been here before," Daniel said, surprising, even himself. "When I was a kid." Not possible. It was sealed military property until 92. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What about the Montauk project?" The temperature seemed to drop. The ranger's expression hardened. She reached for the phone on her desk. "The park's closing early today. You need to leave. I just have a few questions." "Now," she said, her finger hovering over the keypad. "Or I call security." Daniel backed away slowly, pamphlets still in hand. As he drove out of the lot, he saw a black SUV with government plates turning in. The passenger leaned out the window and snapped a photo of his license plate. Daniel didn't go far. He parked near the adjacent public beach, out of sight from the lot. From there, he picked up a sandy trail that wound along the high bluffs, overlooking the Atlantic. The sea crashed below, wild and endless. But his eyes kept drifting to the tree line, where the radar tower peaked above like a sentinel. It was watching him. The trail ran alongside the perimeter fence of the old base. Daniel stopped at a bend, staring through the chain links. His conscious mind swore it was his first time seeing this, but something deeper inside him disagreed. He stepped to the left, scanning the fence. 20 yards down. There, a patch of metal that looked newer. A section had been cut and replaced, exactly where he expected it to be. He touched the metal, cold under his fingers. The sun began sinking toward the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the cliffs. The wind picked up, whispering through the trees. Daniel found a secluded spot just beyond the trail and crouched low, heart pounding. He was close, too close, and he wasn't alone. Where the cliff had eroded from years of battering wind and rain, the bluff sloped steeply down to a narrow ribbon of beach. Sand and crushed shells crunched beneath Daniel's boots as he descended. The sky was turning steel grey now, the wind carrying the briny sting of the Atlantic. Down here, at the very edge of the base, the old concrete seawall jutted out into the surf. It was worn, corroded, its surface a chaotic canvas of spray-painted tags and faded warnings in military stencil. Daniel ran his fingers along the crumbling wall. The texture was rough, granular with decades of salt and decay. Then his hand caught on something subtle, a recessed square, slightly out of place. It was an old rusted electrical box, barely distinguishable from the surrounding concrete. His breath caught in his throat. Without stopping to question why, he punched in a sequence of numbers. 8135. Nothing. He frowned and tried again. 8315. Still no response. Then he entered 8153. A low mechanical groan echoed from deep inside the wall. Somewhere behind the concrete, gears shifted. A panel disguised as part of the seawall creaked inward, breaking the illusion. Daniel pushed. The slab of concrete swung open, with eerie smoothness on concealed hinges, revealing a narrow black tunnel descending into the earth. A rush of air escaped from the passage, damp, electric, and laced with an acrid chemical scent that made Daniel stagger back. It smelled like mildew mixed with ozone, and something sterile, something lab-like. The odor triggered a wave of déjà vu so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He raised his phone, thumbed on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The air grew colder with each step. The sloping passage started as poured concrete but quickly gave way to hand-hewn stone, glistening with condensation. The walls closed in slightly, and Daniel felt like he was descending into the lung of something ancient and forgotten. Yet he wasn't afraid. Somewhere deep inside, he remembered this place. After about 50 yards, the passage opened up into a larger chamber. His light played across rusted metal cabinets, a collapsed shelving unit, shattered glass, and coils of rotted electrical cable. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned maintenance room, but Daniel knew better. This wasn't where repairs had been made. This was where they watched. He turned his light to the far wall. A heavy steel door loomed there, hanging slightly, ajar. Beyond it was a darkness so complete that his flashlight beam was swallowed whole. He stepped toward it cautiously. Just as he reached the threshold, a sharp dizziness overtook him. The room tilted. His knees buckled. He gripped the doorframe for balance, but images began flashing through his mind, disjointed, stuttering like a broken reel of film. Children in hospital gowns, wide-eyed and afraid. Scientists with clipboards murmuring into headsets. A towering, metal chair surrounded by cables and blinking lights. A voice echoing from the past. "Focus on the light, Daniel. Tell us what you see through the gateway." His fingers loosened. The phone dropped with a clatter, flashlight flickering wildly. Before going dark, Daniel fell to the ground as everything went black. The last thing he saw before passing out was a strange symbol scratched deep into the metal of the door. A triangle intersecting a perfect circle. When he came to, he was lying on the beach. Waves lapped at his feet. The sky above was star-speckled, the sun long gone. Daniel sat up with effort. His clothes were soaked with seawater, though he had no memory of entering the ocean. His hair was crusted with salt. Sand stuck to his face and arms. His phone was gone, and when he turned back to the seawall, there was nothing. No seam, no rusted box, just weather-beaten concrete and a fading smear of graffiti. The door was gone, or had never been there at all. Daniel stumbled to his feet, head spinning. His watch read 9:03 p.m., but it was the date that stopped him cold. 3 days had passed. The drive back to Connecticut was a blur, a hypnotic crawl through shadowy backroads and flickering streetlights. The hum of tires on asphalt felt far away. His mind reeled, flooded with memories that made no sense, but felt more real than most of his adult life. He remembered the chair, the MTO chair, they called it, short for Montauk Temporal Oscillator, a monstrous machine cobbled together from Cold War hardware, reverse-engineered alien components, and Tesla-inspired circuitry. He could still feel the moment they powered it on, how his mind felt like it was ripped from his skull, pulled like taffy through dimensions he couldn't name, and he remembered what they made him do. Back in his apartment, Daniel didn't sit. He paced until dawn, scribbling feverishly into a spiral notebook, fingers smudged with ink. Names floated to the surface of his memory. Dr. Marcus Bennett, the project lead. A thin man with ice-blue eyes and no trace of warmth. Cameron Hayes, the military liaison, always reeking of stale cigarettes and sweat. Preston Nichols, a technician with a nervous laugh and a kind heart. He used to sneak candy bars to the kids when no one was looking. Preston Nichols. That name felt important. When morning came, Daniel called in sick and drove to the nearest public library. The librarian gave him a puzzled look when he asked for books on the Montauk Project, but pointed him toward a dusty shelf in the back labeled Paranormal and Conspiracy. Sandwiched between paperbacks about Roswell and MK Ultra was a dog-eared book titled The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time by Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon. Daniel's hands trembled as he flipped through it. The words blurred and refocused. Page after page matched the fragments in his head. Camp Heroes' hidden labs, psychic experimentation, time displacement, children trained to navigate dimensions. Even the chair. It was all there. According to Nichols, the Montauk Project wasn't a rumor. It was a continuation of something even darker. The Philadelphia Experiment. Another rumored government experiment had always haunted the fringes of conspiracy theories, the so-called Philadelphia Experiment. According to legend, a naval destroyer, the USS Eldridge, had been rendered temporarily invisible in 1943 and teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia. It sounded insane, like something out of a pulp sci-fi novel, but it didn't stop there. A book Daniel had once stumbled across claimed this experiment was only the beginning. It said that years later, in 1983, a related project at Montauk Air Force Station, codenamed the Montauk Project, had ended in disaster. According to the account, a terrifying entity, referred to only as the Beast, was psychically pulled through a rift in space-time. The creature wreaked havoc inside the facility, attacking anything that moved until the power was cut. After that, the site was allegedly abandoned. But Daniel knew that wasn't the whole truth. The project hadn't been terminated. It had simply evolved. The techniques they pioneered at Montauk weren't scrapped. They were refined. The technology, the research, all of it had been quietly folded into other black-budget programs, dispersed across multiple secret sites. That way, if one site failed, it wouldn't bring down the entire operation. Later that evening, Daniel found himself standing alone in his apartment, staring up at the closet. His eyes were fixed on a small metal box tucked away on the top shelf. He didn't remember placing it there, and yet, he knew it belonged to him. He knew what was inside. His breath caught as he crouched, by the dresser, reaching underneath. His fingers touched something smooth, tape. Peeling it away, he found a small key. Again, no memory of hiding it, but a deep, unsettling certainty that this was where it was meant to be. He unlocked the box. Inside was a single object, a US bank safety deposit key. There was no note, no explanation, just that cold, metallic object, resting heavily in his palm. The next morning, he walked into First National Bank in downtown Hartford. Everything about the place felt sterile and overly bright. He approached the teller with calmness he didn't feel. "I have a deposit box to access," he said, handing over the key and his ID. The manager, an older man with thinning grey hair and a polite but distant expression, escorted him into the vault area. The thick door sealed shut behind them with a dull thud. "This way, sir." Daniel followed him in silence. When the drawer was pulled from the wall, the manager left him, alone. The moment the man disappeared, Daniel opened the drawer. Inside was a sealed manila envelope. Red security tape ran across the flap, stamped with federal clearance markings. His stomach twisted. This was material he was never supposed to see. He broke the seal. Photos spilled out first. Black and white, grainy, institutional. Children in a sterile facility, some of them sitting motionless, others wired to strange machines. One photo made his breath hitch. A young boy, maybe 10, sat, strapped to a massive chair surrounded by Tesla coils and humming computers. Daniel's stomach dropped. The boy was him. Other images showed parts of the same facility. Steel hallways, observation rooms, a huge underground chamber. He turned to the documents. They were partial research notes, schematics of the chair, labeled MTOC interface, annotated, with complex equations that twisted in his brain like fractals. Just looking at them made his temples throb. One document was a map, Camp Hero. The surface layout was marked in blue, but the underground sections glowed in red ink. Tunnels, chambers, nodes. At the bottom of the stack was a paper sleeve. Inside, it was a compact disc. No label, no title, just one thing printed on the front. August 12th, 1983. His blood turned to ice. The date of the Beast incident. The worst part was still to come. There was a single typed sheet, yellowed slightly with age. The heading read, Project Subjects, Delta Group. Names were listed in 2 columns, each with a designation. His eyes found his name. Daniel Carter, Subject 17, Primary Gate Opener. He stared at it for a long time, heart pounding in his ears. That night, after double-checking his apartment locks and drawing every curtain tight, Daniel sat at his desk with the disc trembling in his hand. He slid it into his laptop. The screen flickered. A single video file appeared. No title. Just the file extension and a date, time stamp. He clicked it. Grainy footage appeared. A static security camera feed. It showed a concrete room, cold and sterile, dominated by a strange chair that looked like a medieval torture device fused with advanced technology. He recognized it instantly. The same chair from the photo. The same one he couldn't stop sketching even when he wasn't thinking about it. In the video, a small boy, him, was strapped into the chair. Electrodes clung to his head. Men in lab coats moved around the room, checking readouts, whispering. Military officers in full uniform stood like statues at the doors. A voice crackled over the speaker system. Initiating Delta Protocol in 3, 2, 1. The lights dimmed. Electricity surged into the chair. Young Daniel's body went stiff, his back arching as if some invisible force had seized him. His eyes rolled back. Sparks burst from a console. A technician stumbled backward, cursing. Then, in the center of the room, the air shimmered. It split open. A tear appeared, black and pulsing like a wound in space. It didn't look like a shadow or a hole. It looked alive, and something was coming through it. The camera glitched. Static roared. When the image returned, the room had exploded into chaos. Screaming, people running, a spray of blood across the far wall, and then, barely visible in the corner of the screen, it. Something wrong. A shifting thing, its form constantly warping. Impossible angles, shapes that the brain couldn't pass. It hurt just to look at. The lens distorted around it, as though reality itself recoiled from its presence. The final frame was crystal clear. Young Daniel, strapped in that nightmare chair, staring straight into the camera. Blood streamed from his nose and ears. His mouth moved. No sound, but Daniel could read the words. You have to shut it down before it opens again. The video cut to static. Daniel sat frozen, hands still on the laptop. His fingers were numb. Inside his mind, something was cracking open. Memories. Buried fragments clicking into place. Faces, voices, cold metal tables, screaming behind glass. He remembered now, all of it. The next day, Daniel picked up the phone. The number was burned into Daniel's mind, 6 digits that made no logical sense, but he knew them the way he knew his own name. He didn't remember where he'd learned them, only that they mattered. He picked up his phone and dialed. The voice that answered was gravelly, guarded. Old. Hello? Daniel's throat was dry. Is this Preston Nichols? There was a long pause. Just breathing on the other end. Who's asking? My name is Daniel Cross, he said slowly. I was Subject 17, Montauk. Silence. So long that Daniel checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice no longer guarded, just tired. God help you, boy, he whispered. They're still watching. I need answers. Not over the phone, Nichols said sharply. They're always listening. Daniel's heart pounded. Then when? Another pause. The lighthouse. Tomorrow. Noon. The line went dead. The next day, Daniel arrived at Montauk Point Lighthouse almost an hour early. He parked his rental, car at the edge of the public lot, far away from the cluster of tourists milling around the gift shop. He'd left his personal vehicle back in Hartford, too paranoid to risk being tracked. Every movement felt like it could be watched. The lighthouse loomed against a bruised grey sky, the red and white stripes looking too cheerful for the weight in Daniel's chest. Thunderheads were piling in from the Atlantic, wind gusting sharp and cold. A storm was coming. Nichols was already there. Daniel spotted him sitting alone on a bench overlooking the sea. He was thick-set, hunched into a weathered fisherman's jacket, staring at the waves with a distant, unblinking gaze. As Daniel approached, Nichols spoke without turning his head. They told us we were serving our country, he said, voice flat, eyes locked on the roiling ocean. Advancing human potential, opening frontiers. What a load of horseshit. Daniel sat beside him, the cold bench biting through his jeans. You were there, Daniel said. You helped them. Nichols finally turned. His face was sun-worn and deeply lined, his eyes red-rimmed and heavy with guilt. And I've spent 40 years trying to make up for it, he murmured. Jesus, you grew up. Last time I saw you, you were just a skinny kid with too much power in his head. Daniel's voice was quiet. What did they do to me? Nichols sighed and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a battered pack of cigarettes. His hands shook as he lit one. He took a deep drag before answering. You were special, even among the sensitives. Most of the kids, maybe they could pick up thoughts, bend a spoon if they concentrated hard enough. But you? He exhaled smoke through his nose. You could create doorways. Daniel blinked. Doorways to where? That was the question, wasn't it? Nichols said. At first, we were just trying to develop remote viewing. Let the kids psychically see places. Russia, classified facilities, submarines. But then, we realized, some of you didn't just see. You could reach. He glanced sideways at Daniel. And you, Daniel, you could open gates. Gates that others could walk through. Daniel felt his pulse thudding in his ears. They started small, Nichols continued. Different rooms in the facility, then different times, minutes, hours, eventually years. By 82, we had you opening doorways to places that weren't here. The beast, Daniel whispered. Nichols paled. He looked away. So you remember. I found a recording. Nichols didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was soft and raw. Then you know what came through wasn't from another continent, not even another time. It was from somewhere else, a place that doesn't follow the same laws of physics, or even thought. He crushed the cigarette under his boot with sudden force. We lost 16 people that day. 16, before we managed to cut power to the chair. And the thing, it didn't die. It just folded back into a dimension we can't perceive. Daniel gripped the edge of the bench. His skull throbbed with flickers of memory, images half-formed, sounds without context, screaming, static, something massive shifting just out of sight. They shut it down after that. Nichols gave a bitter laugh. Officially? Sure. The Montauk project was sealed, files shredded, concrete poured over the site. But you know how these things work. He turned, eyes sharp now despite their weariness. They didn't stop. They went deeper, buried the research in even darker places, compartmentalized it, privatized it. I don't remember anything after that day, Daniel said. My whole life, school, college, work, it all feels wrong, like it's been painted over. It was, Nichols said. They used the best MK Ultra techniques, available, hypnotic suggestion, memory wipes, chemical therapy. They didn't just bury your past, Daniel. They built you a new one, brick by brick. He leaned in, his voice dropping. But here's the real question. Why are you remembering? Now? That programming doesn't just break down. Not after all this time. Before Daniel could answer, something shifted. The world around him flickered, like a double exposure photograph. For a heartbeat, reality split. He saw the same bench, same lighthouse, but under a cloudless blue sky. Tourists in sun hats, children laughing. Nichols beside him, but younger, cleaner shaven, wearing a white lab coat instead of a fisherman's jacket. Happening again, the old man muttered, his voice echoing strangely, like it existed in both timelines at once. Daniel gripped the bench, stomach lurching with nausea. The sky stuttered between grey and blue. His vision pulsed, doubled. The sea roared, then went silent, then returned again. "What's happening to me?" he gasped. "Time," Nichols said grimly, "is bleeding through." Daniel clutched his forehead. His skull felt like it was splitting. "Your connection to the chair," Nichols said, his form glitching. Young, old, then young again. It was never fully severed. They thought they shut it down, but it only went dormant. He leaned closer. His face was fluctuating now, like a badly rendered 3D model stuck between frames. And now, it's waking up. "Listen carefully," Nichols said, voice low and urgent. "There's an access point they never sealed. Bunker 14, near the old power station. The equipment's still there. You need to..." The air shimmered. Daniel's vision blurred. It was as if the world around him had been dropped into water, rippling outward. His ears rang. Pressure built behind his eyes, pushing in like his skull was about to implode. Reality flickered, just for a second. And when it came back into focus, Nichols was gone. In his place stood a teenage boy. His face was familiar, almost too familiar. Daniel blinked in disbelief. The boy wore a weathered Camp Hero security badge on his chest and spoke with Nichols's voice, an old man's voice, steady and worn. "Find the failsafe before it's too late," the boy said, not seeming to notice the change. "They're trying to recreate the conditions from 83, but they don't understand the danger." His form shimmered, glitched. "They don't understand how thin the membrane is now," the boy continued. "Those original experiments weakened it. It's fragile." The boy flickered again, like a video buffering, and in his place stood Nichols, back in his elderly body. He grabbed Daniel's arm, his grip iron hard. "Go back to Camp Hero, Bunker 14. Destroy the chair before they use it again," he said, voice hoarse but commanding. Another wave rolled through the air, heatless, silent, and then everything was still. Daniel blinked. He was alone on the bench. The wind rustled the trees gently as a family of tourists walked by, slowing for a moment to look at him. Pale, sweating, eyes wide, muttering something to himself. That night, he returned to Camp Hero under a moonless sky. The fence was old, rusted, and riddled with gaps. He slipped through a blind spot in the security system he somehow remembered from long ago. Too long ago. The ranger station was abandoned, its windows dark. Daniel moved like a ghost through the decaying remnants of the base, driven not just by purpose but by memory. Not memories, memory, singular. As though he had lived this before. The power station loomed ahead, its massive turbines silent for decades. Behind it, half hidden by ivy and tall grass, was a squat concrete structure. Stenciled on its rusted door, barely legible. 14. The lock had been broken recently. Daniel stepped inside, flicking on his flashlight. The beam cut through the thick dark, revealing a metal staircase leading down. The deeper he descended, the colder the air became. It smelled of copper and ozone, sharp and unnatural. The concrete walls gave way to rough bedrock, and the sense of something wrong crept into his skin. At the bottom was a long corridor. As Daniel walked forward, Time began to slide sideways. The walls shimmered. The corridor transformed in flashes. 1 second, it was dusty and ruined. The next, pristine and brightly lit. He could hear voices from decades ago, laughter, orders barked through radios, footsteps of soldiers on patrol. Ghosts passed through. Him. Technicians, guards, people who no longer existed. He wasn't just remembering. He was there. The corridor ended at a massive steel vault door, now wedged open. Inside was the heart of the Montauk project. A vast chamber stretched out before him. Ancient computer banks hummed alongside sleek modern tech. Equipment that should have been decommissioned in the 80s still glowed with power. And at the center, anchored like an altar, stood the chair. Even powered down, it exuded menace. Its strange alloy frame pulsed faintly, as if waiting, watching. Daniel approached cautiously. Around the chair he saw toolboxes left open, tangled cords, half-eaten food on a workbench. Someone had been here, recently. A whiteboard was covered in complex mathematical formulas, and one thing circled in red. T-24, 12, 09 tomorrow night. Daniel took another step forward, and the world shattered. Suddenly, he was two people. He stood before the chair as an adult, and he was also a boy, strapped into the same chair. He felt cold leather on his child wrists, tasted metal in his mouth. Two lives, two selves, overlaid like film reels out of sync. "Good morning, Daniel." The voice came from nowhere, then everywhere. It was him, the man who had haunted his dreams. Dr. Bennett stepped out from the shadows. His hair was silver now, but his eyes were still that same piercing blue. Calm, clinical, predatory. Daniel's, a heart hammered. "You," he whispered, "you're still running this?" "Of course," Bennett said, smiling faintly. He circled Daniel slowly, like a lion stalking prey. "Did you really think we'd abandon the greatest scientific discovery in human history, especially after what you showed us was possible?" "You have to stop this," Daniel said. His voice was shaking. "You don't understand what you're doing." Bennett stopped and turned. "Oh, but we do. Better than ever." He gestured to the banks of equipment. 40 years of refinement, data, trial and error. Yes, the 83 incident was unfortunate. 16 people died, Daniel snapped. "But necessary," Bennett finished, unfazed. "Progress always demands sacrifice, and we're so close now." Daniel looked past him at the chair, its outline flickering like it existed in two places at once. A low hum filled the chamber. Static tingled at the edge of his hearing. "You don't know what this machine does," Daniel said. "Not really. You think it's just a tool, but it opens something." Bennett's smile faded. For a moment, something colder crept into his eyes. "Oh, we know what it opens." He leaned in, whispering now. "We've seen what's on the other side." "Sacrifice," Bennett repeated, his voice hardening, eyes cold. "And now you've returned, exactly as our models predicted. The prodigal son, drawn back at the precise moment we needed you." Daniel took a step back, inching toward the chair. "I didn't come back to help you. I came to destroy it." Bennett tilted his head slightly, a hint of amusement flickering in his expression. "You came because you're still connected to it. On a quantum level, Daniel. You never left that chair." Daniel's breath caught. Bennett nodded to someone behind him. "Your memories, your life, all of it. Just scaffolding," Bennett said. "A holding pattern, while your mind matured into what we needed." Too late, Daniel sensed motion behind him. A sharp sting bloomed in his neck. He gasped, stumbling. A hypodermic needle, already pulled free, glinted in the technician's hand. The world tilted, vision swimming. The walls seemed to pulse with light. What did you..." He tried to speak, but his limbs were heavy, numb. The last thing he saw before everything went black was Bennett's face leaning close. "Welcome home, Subject 17, he said softly. Tomorrow, you'll help us open the ultimate doorway. Daniel awoke strapped into the chair. Thick leather bands held his arms and legs in place. Electrodes clung to his temples and chest. The hum of power filled the chamber, deep and rhythmic, like a mechanical heartbeat. Banks of computers blinked with activity. Technicians in sterile white coats moved with grim precision. Armed guards flanked the walls, their rifles held low but ready. His mind was sharper now, too sharp. The chemical fog was gone. Suppressed, memories surged back like a tidal wave. He remembered being a child in this place, the experiments, the hours strapped into that very chair, the growing panic among the staff as the initial success gave way to fear, and finally, what came through the gate in 1983. Not something, someone. Dr. Bennett stood nearby, flipping through pages on a clipboard, a technician beside him checking monitors. Consciousness has returned, the tech reported. Excellent, Bennett said. We have limited time before the alignment window opens. Daniel twisted against the restraints. You can't do this, he said, voice raw. You saw what happened last time. The entity couldn't survive in our world. It was unstable. It almost tore this place apart. Bennett calmly checked a series of readouts, unfazed. This time we're better prepared. The integration will be controlled. That word stopped Daniel cold. Integration, he repeated, dread creeping, in like ice water in his veins. You're not just opening a doorway. You want to bring something through, permanently. Bennett finally looked at him. His expression was unreadable. Not something, Daniel. Someone. He paused. Or more accurately, many someones. He gestured toward a large monitor. The screen came to life, displaying a rapid stream of images, alien structures, machines of impossible design, humanoid figures with metallic limbs and radiant eyes, weapons, tools, biological augmentations, genetic blueprints that made no sense by current scientific standards. Our visitors, Bennett said, have much to offer: knowledge, power, evolutionary acceleration. He adjusted a dial on the console beside him. The hum of the chair deepened. All they ask in return is an environment and hosts who can withstand the process. Daniel stared at him, horror clawing through his chest. They're not visitors, he said, his voice breaking. They're invaders, and you're giving them the door code. Bennett turned away, as if Daniel's words were mere static. Begin the initialization sequence, he said to the techs. Power to 70%. The chair vibrated beneath Daniel, subtle at first, then more pronounced, a resonance, the sense that space itself was being stretched, twisted. Daniel clenched his jaw. That old, terrible sensation returned, the feeling of being unmade. His consciousness pulled outward like taffy, spread thin across invisible threads. He could feel the fabric of the world thinning. Waveform activity increasing, a technician called out. Quantum tunneling effect established, temporal aperture forming. Monitors all around pulsed in sync, data streaming faster than human eyes could process. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. They thought he was just a conduit, a key to unlock the gate. But they were wrong. He wasn't just the key, he was the doorway. He had always been. Back in 1983, when it came through, when all hell broke loose, young Daniel had done something instinctive, desperate. He'd imprinted a failsafe deep within the chair's quantum framework, a shadow code hidden in the lattice of entangled particles. Only he could access it. Now, as the power built to a scream, Daniel reached for that code. His mind slipped free of the present, moving sideways through dimensions. His body trembled with energy, the room around him fading into a blur. He reached across the veil and felt them, waiting. Vast presences, not beings, minds, ancient, immense, curious, hungry, like fingers against a soap bubble. Pressing. Aperture at 60%, someone called. Dimensional breach imminent. Bennett leaned in, his voice a breath against Daniel's ear. Can you feel them? They've waited so long to meet us properly. Daniel's eyes stayed closed. "Yes," he whispered. "I can feel them." He paused. "And they're not what you think." A sudden blaring alarm cut through the room. "Power surge!" a technician shouted. "System drawing more than input capacity." Bennett snapped his head around. "That's impossible." "It's me," Daniel said, his voice unnervingly calm as blood began to trickle from his nose. "I'm the power source now. I always was." Around him, equipment sparked and hissed. Screens blinked out, lights flickered. Wildly, as energy bled from every system in the room, pulled toward the chair like water down a drain, the metal beneath Daniel's body grew red hot enough to blister and burn, but he barely flinched. His focus was elsewhere, far beyond the physical pain. At the center of the room, the air began to ripple and twist. Reality itself buckled, folding inward like origami, contorting into impossible shapes and angles. A shimmering aperture opened, and through it came glimpses of something unspeakable, a realm vast and alien, built of architectures that defied human understanding. Towers that curved in on themselves, spirals that led nowhere, and beings, if they could be called that, made not of flesh or matter, but of light and thought and intent. "Yes!" Bennett shouted, eyes wide with ecstasy. "It's working!" But even as he exulted, a nearby technician turned to him in panic. "Sir, the subject's brainwave patterns. He's rewriting the protocol. He's altering the coordinates." Bennett's joy curdled. "Override him. Cut direct neural input." "We can't," the tech replied. "He's bypassed all the safeguards." Daniel opened his eyes. They glowed now, radiating with an inner light that cast no shadows, only pressure. When he spoke, his voice wasn't just sound. It resonated through the room like music played on broken glass. "I'm not opening a door for them to come here," he said, eyes locked on Bennett. "I'm creating a vacuum, a one-way passage." The aperture widened. Swirling blackness surged with colors that shouldn't exist. The air began to howl, pulled inward with a terrible force. Papers, tools, loose equipment skidded across the floor toward the growing vortex. "What are you doing?" Bennett screamed, clawing at a table bolted to the floor. "What I should have done 40 years ago." With a deafening crack, the restraints snapped. Daniel lifted from the chair, hovering in place, suspended not by any mechanical force, but by something far older and more fundamental. His body shimmered, as if caught between dimensions. "I'm collapsing the bridge," he said, "permanently." The pull of the vortex intensified. A nearby guard lost his footing and slid across the floor, screaming, before being snatched into the swirling darkness. His body stretched unnaturally, grotesquely, and then vanished. Others clung to consoles and railings, eyes wide with terror. "You'll destroy everything," Bennett shouted, dragging himself toward the control panel. "Only the infection," Daniel answered. "The chair, the tech, the knowledge, everything that came through, everything that doesn't belong in our world." With a sound like the sky itself being torn open, the aperture expanded. It swallowed the chair, warping the metal as it was, pulled inward. Consoles imploded, wires sizzled and turned to ash. Computer screens flickered and died. Reality around the gateway buckled. Circuits came undone at the atomic level. The very laws of physics twisted and collapsed. Bennett, desperate, lunged for Daniel, his face twisted with rage and denial. "We were so close!" His fingers brushed Daniel's arm, and in that moment, Daniel saw everything. All the experiments, the ambition, the obsession that had turned a brilliant man into a zealot, and he felt, for just a moment, pity. "We were never going to share, Doctor," Daniel said quietly. "We weren't allies to them. We were cattle." The floor gave way beneath them. The ceiling cracked and fell in slabs as the entire bunker began folding inward. Support beams twisted and collapsed. The vortex roared, devouring everything in its path. In the last fraction of a second before he blacked out, Daniel saw it, the thing, not entering, but being pulled back through. It was massive, beyond size. The beast of Montauk, pulled home after 40 years of silent waiting in the liminal spaces between realities. Daniel could barely process it, just the impression of it. Geometries that stabbed at his mind, eyes without number, mouths without shape, and a voice that didn't speak in words, but in knowing. "You have closed the way," it said, its voice, bypassing Daniel's ears, drilling directly into his thoughts. But there are other doors, other keys. As the bunker collapsed inward, Daniel used the last of his strength to direct one final surge of power into the gateway. His consciousness became the seal, the lock itself, binding the passage shut. He woke to the steady beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. Fluorescent light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting faint stripes on the white sheets. His body felt hollow, like it had been poured from stone. Every breath, every blink, took effort. A nurse noticed he was awake and rushed out of the room. A few minutes later, a doctor entered, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, with tired eyes and a gentle smile. She explained that he'd been found, unconscious on the beach near Montauk Point, dehydrated, sunburnt, and badly bruised. No ID, no wallet. He'd been in a coma for 6 days. When she asked what had happened, Daniel stared at the ceiling for a long time. "I don't remember," he finally said. She nodded, as if she didn't believe him, but wouldn't press. 3 days later, he checked himself out against medical advice. His apartment was just as he had left it, mostly. Everything was in its place, but he could tell. Someone had been there. The kind of search only professionals could perform. Subtle, clean, not a drawer out of place. But things had been moved. His books, his laptop, even the floorboards, lifted and carefully set back. They hadn't found what they were looking for, because it wasn't there anymore. It was still with him. He could feel it. An invisible presence lingering in the room, like a psychic fingerprint pressed onto every surface. His computer was gone, so were his notebooks, pages filled with memories, drawings, observations, everything that had helped him piece together what he had endured. In their place sat a single manila folder on the table. Inside, just one document, a formal job offer from the US Department of Energy. The salary was 3 times what he currently made. No explanation, no contact info, just an offer and an address to report to. That was the message. Forget what happened. Take the money. Live quietly, under surveillance. Daniel stared at it for a long time, his hands trembling. Then he struck a match. The paper curled and blackened in the sink as he watched it burn to ash. He spent the next week moving like a ghost. No credit cards, no phones, no patterns. He paid cash at hole-in-the-wall electronics stores, picking up pieces of specialized broadcasting equipment from dusty hobbyist shops and flea markets. A high-end laptop, stripped of any factory tracking systems. Components cobbled together from different cities. By the end, he had everything he needed to build a crude but powerful transmitter, one capable of hijacking digital signals, inserting itself into radio and streaming feeds like a ghost whispering, through static. He checked into a cheap motel under a fake name. The wallpaper peeled. The heater rattled when it ran. It was perfect. By midnight, wires snaked across the stained carpet like veins. Cables led to a camera mounted on a stack of old books. The laptop hummed, already connected to every signal he could tap into. Daniel sat down in front of the camera, took a shaky breath, and hit record. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said, his voice low and steady. "Until a few weeks ago, I was subject. 17 in a classified government program known as the Montauk Project." He paused. Just saying the name out loud made him feel like he was pulling something heavy out of the dark. "I know this sounds insane. I wish it was. I used to think Montauk was just a myth too, an urban legend. But it's not. It's real. And I was part of it." He leaned in slightly, eyes sharp. In the late 70s and early 80s, at a place called Camp Hero, an old Air Force base in Montauk, New York, The US government conducted experiments, not just regular tests. I'm talking about mind control, teleportation, tearing holes between dimensions. They used children, kids like me, ones with psychic sensitivity, strange talents. We were tools to them. He rubbed his temples, the memory flickering behind his eyes like old film. They called it the Montauk chair, a device that could enhance the mind, focus it into something far beyond human. With the right subject, it didn't just read thoughts or move objects. It could open gates, actual tears in the fabric of reality. His voice trembled slightly now. They thought they were contacting higher beings, advanced intelligences. But they were wrong. These weren't benevolent entities. I don't know what else to call them, except predators. They wanted in, not to teach us, not to help, to take, to colonize, to feed. Daniel swallowed, feeling a lump in his throat. They found people, men with power, who were willing to open the door for them. Maybe they were blinded by greed, or maybe they believed. The lies. In 1983, something happened. Something came through. We called it the Beast. It wasn't fully formed, but it was enough. 16 people died. Officially, they shut the program down. But they didn't. They just scattered it, rebranded it, buried it deeper. He glanced off camera, then back. Last week, they tried again. They brought me back, their best gate opener. But I didn't follow the script. I collapsed the gate. I destroyed the Montauk chair. I sealed it, I think. A drop of blood slid from his nostril. He wiped it away quickly. I don't know how long I have before they find me, he said, more quietly. The entities, they can't fully enter anymore, not without a gate, but their influence. It's still here. They don't possess people like in the movies. They tempt. They whisper. They offer pieces of forbidden knowledge that rot the mind from the inside. Daniel's hand reached out and pulled a stack of papers closer. The tech from Montauk, fragments of it, still exists. Different projects, different names. But the work continues. Look for signs, hidden military installations, strange clusters of missing kids, ones who seem different, weather anomalies that make no sense. These are the fingerprints of Montauk's legacy. He lifted a flash drive into frame. I'm uploading everything I have with this message. Research notes, photos, coordinates. Some files are incomplete, others corrupted, but it's enough. I've hidden the rest. If anything happens to me, more will be released, automatically. Daniel stared into the lens, his voice thick with urgency now. If you're watching this, and you ever feel it, that sensation that something's wrong, not just wrong, but wrong in a way you can't explain, pay attention to that feeling. Trust it. The barrier between worlds is thinner than we think. Sometimes things slip through. They always have. And now, after Montauk, they do it more often. He leaned closer, his face filling the frame. They made us forget. But memory is dangerous. Static buzzed in the background. The lights flickered overhead. Daniel didn't blink. His eyes were hollowed with exhaustion, but behind them burned a quiet resolve. Haunted, but determined, especially when it remembers the future. The recording cut off. Daniel didn't flinch. He immediately uploaded the video, along with the scanned documents he'd recovered. Pages stained with age, diagrams, coordinates, photos, and torn bits of classified memos. Using a web of decentralized servers and encrypted peer-to-peer protocols, he seeded the files across countless nodes around the world. The data was now far too dispersed to be scrubbed entirely. Even if they tried, they'd never erase all of it. And it was too complex, too detailed, to be dismissed as the rantings of a madman. The upload bar reached 100%. The laptop screen stuttered. Static filled it, crackling like a weak TV signal. But then, from the chaos of digital snow, a pattern began to form. Lines, pulses, harmonics, layered within the interference. The same signal that had first called to him through his television weeks ago. Only now, Daniel understood. It wasn't from them. It was from others, survivors, children of Montauk, like him. Their memories were returning too, bubbling up through years of suppression and trauma. They were awake, and they were reaching out, broadcasting across the digital void, quietly looking for someone who remembered. He wasn't alone. Daniel closed the laptop gently, almost reverently, and began packing what little he had left. A change of clothes, a few pieces of gear, a burner phone. The motel room smelled of mildew and bleach. Through the thin, yellowing curtain, he watched as 2 black SUVs pulled into the lot. Men in dark suits stepped out, clean-cut, unremarkable, but with a mechanical precision in their movements. Government agents, no doubt about it. But they were too late. The truth was already out, flowing freely into the world. No matter how fast they moved, no matter how many screens they shut off, they couldn't stop it. People would see his testimony. Some would dismiss it. Some would mock it. But others would listen. Seeds of awareness had already taken root. Daniel sat calmly on the edge of the motel bed. He could hear footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. The thud of boots on concrete, the quiet jingle of radios and holstered weapons. He wasn't afraid anymore. He understood now that what had been done to him at Montauk hadn't destroyed him. It had changed him. The abilities they had forcefully awakened didn't vanish when he escaped. They simply went quiet, waiting, dormant, until now. He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and then, silently, he reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind. He stretched it across the room, then beyond, past walls, past time, past the edges of the visible world, searching for the quantum threads that connect every place, every moment. He felt them, vibrations, possibilities, doors hidden in the fabric of space-time. He had opened them before. He could do it again. The door burst open. 2 agents swept in, weapons raised. But the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no shattered window, no broken locks. The air was still. Daniel's phone lay on the bed. Its screen was lit up with a single unsent message addressed to Dr. Bennett. There are other doors, other keys, and now I have them all. 3 days later, across the globe, something strange happened. For a brief moment, barely a second, computer screens flickered. And in that flicker, a symbol appeared. A triangle intersecting with a perfect circle. Then it vanished. Most people missed it, but not everyone. The Montauk project was never officially acknowledged. It existed only in rumors, half-buried conspiracy, forums, and the ravings of broken minds. Whistleblowers suffered fatal accidents or simply vanished. The public video Daniel uploaded was discredited almost immediately. Experts called it a hoax, pointing to clever editing, faked documents, AI-enhanced audio. But something had shifted. A low hum had begun beneath the surface of society. Unexplained murmurs that refused to go quiet. Children, especially, began reporting strange dreams, visions of underground chambers, spinning machines, wires trailing from their skulls, drawings of shadowy men and chairs that bent reality. They were dismissed as fantasy, but some researchers noticed spikes in temporal anomalies around certain government facilities, time lapses, strange energy readings, instruments going haywire, with no clear source. Radio enthusiasts reported picking up whispers buried in the white noise between stations, soft, indecipherable voices just beyond comprehension. And in those moments, if they listened closely, one phrase echoed again and again. They made us forget. But memory is a dangerous thing, especially when it remembers the future. Our story is called False Skies, a conspiracy thriller about the darkest deception ever committed by a government, and the man who tried to expose it. It imagines a world where the worst terrorist attack in modern history wasn't just predicted, it was engineered, crafted to spark endless wars and channel billions into the ever-hungry military-industrial complex. And now, 2 decades later, that same machine is being challenged. An unassuming former FBI data analyst named Thomas Keane stumbles upon buried archives, classified files, communications logs, surveillance footage, evidence pointing to a betrayal. So monstrous, it could unravel the post-attack world order. But the deeper he digs, the faster the hounds come. Now he's on the run. Hunted by a black-budget agency that doesn't officially exist. Tracked by digital ghosts, manipulated by psyops, haunted by things not entirely human. But Thomas isn't trying to save himself. He's trying to wake you up. If your eyelids grow heavy while reading this, that's okay. This story is meant to be immersive, lush with detail. Perhaps you'll drift to sleep pondering how fear itself became the most profitable industry on Earth. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll keep turning pages, heart racing, breath tight, uncovering layer after layer, until you reach the final word and remember something that was taken from you. Either way, I hope you come away with new insights. Insights about how power, once seized, never really lets go. It sinks into the shadows, holding tight even when no one's looking. Shall we begin? Settle in. Let your breathing slow. Picture the cold flicker of old CRT monitors, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights in an archive no one talks about. Imagine binders stamped top secret with pages torn out. Pages that, if found, could shift the weight of history. This is False Skies, told in 5 parts. Each one takes you deeper into the maze. Listen closely. The biggest truths don't scream. They whisper from the corners of the official story. Thomas Keane didn't feel like a revolutionary the first time he pressed send. He didn't feel brave, or noble, or dangerous. He just felt tired, bone deep, soul heavy, tired, and guilty. He was a man alone in a rundown motel, sitting at a rickety desk with a laptop that should have died years ago. The place smelled like stale coffee, dust, and something sour in the carpet. But the Wi-Fi worked. That's all that mattered. In the USB port, a single flash drive, the one he'd labeled Black Dust. The name gave nothing away, but inside, it held something explosive. A cache of classified FBI memos, shipping logs, and encrypted internal communications. If proven real, the documents would confirm every wild conspiracy theory about the worst terrorist attack in modern history. Outside, the sky was dull and grey. No lightning, no sirens, just an ordinary, anticlimactic morning, the kind that shouldn't change the world, but it might. He checked the VPN again. Triple bounced, masked, untraceable. His fingers trembled. His heart beat too loud. Then, he did it. He uploaded Black Dust to an offshore whistleblower site known for publishing government secrets. Before hitting the final send, he typed a short note for the thousands who died, for the millions who were lied to. Click. Within an hour, the file hit inboxes at several newsrooms around the world. One stood out, an international outlet with a reputation for exposing corruption. Their editorial team worked fast, sorting through gigabytes of intel. Bits and pieces began lining up. Code names matched real operations. Memos echoed confirmed. Internal dates, the language too formal, too consistent to fake. A quiet panic started to build. By sunset, the first story was live. Unverified documents allegedly reveal internal plot behind 20-year-old attack. There were disclaimers everywhere. Experts doubted. Skeptics scoffed. The mainstream brushed it off as either a glitch, a hoax, or maybe even AI-generated nonsense. But something didn't feel fake. There were typed memos from intelligence briefings months before the attack. One line stood out like a knife. A catalytic event may be necessary to galvanize public opinion in favor of sustained international action. Then came insurance records. Certain tower floors had their policies increased days before the tragedy. Then came internal wargame notes, stand-down orders, delayed response drills, all timed with eerie accuracy to the real event. Thomas sat on the motel bed, staring at the TV as a jittery anchor tried to explain the leak. The words "foreign propaganda" flashed beneath her. The White House had officially denied everything. He knew what came next. The hunt. He sighed, closed the laptop, stuffed it into a worn backpack, and walked out. No goodbyes, just the crunch of gravel under his boots. He had worked inside the FBI's data analytics division for nearly 10 years. Quiet, dependable. His job was to compile anomaly reports, strange financial transactions, odd defense contracts, things that didn't add up. But over time, too many things stopped adding up. Private contractors, intelligence brass, Wall Street elites. They all seemed to benefit from the war that followed. Slowly, Thomas began saving the files, just in case. For a day when he could no longer keep them to himself. Today was that day. Elsewhere, high-level meetings exploded into motion. His name, Thomas, Keene, lit up on screens in secure offices. They knew him. He'd flagged on a few internal audits before, always too curious, too thorough. The call went out. Contain him, discredit him, label him a threat. The order came directly from Eldridge Shaw, head of a classified intelligence division that officially didn't exist. Shaw believed one thing with absolute certainty. The official narrative must hold, or everything falls apart. By midnight, Keene's name was in federal bulletins. Thomas Keene, suspected hacker, domestic threat. Teams were already combing security camera feeds. They traced his last login, the nearest gas station cameras, the motel registry. Shaw picked up a phone and called an executive at a major media conglomerate. He spoke calmly but firmly. Kill the coverage. All of it. Redirect to the flooding. In the Midwest. The response was instant. Yes, sir. The story vanished from prime time. It wasn't retracted, it was simply buried, overshadowed by less dangerous news. But it wasn't gone. On social media, the fire was lit. The screenshots, the PDFs, the archived URLs, they spread faster than Shaw's team could delete them. The genie was out. The hashtag #JustBlackDust exploded across the internet like a spark to dry grass. Within hours, amateur sleuths and armchair analysts were dissecting every memo, every paragraph. Some data experts joined in, cross-referencing the IP addresses in the leaked emails. To their surprise and horror, many of the digital fingerprints traced back to known government subdomains, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic camouflage. Even these partial revelations were enough to shake the public. If the documents were genuine, it wasn't just a failure of intelligence. It was something darker. It implied that parts of the US establishment didn't just know about the attacks in advance. They may have helped them happen, maximizing the death toll to justify long-term political and military agendas. A new phrase began to circulate online. False skies. It captured the sense of betrayal, the idea that everything, the news, the history books, the patriotic speeches, was a painted ceiling over a much grimmer reality. A manufactured sky. Within 24 hours, small protests began outside Federal, buildings in New York, Chicago, DC, and Los Angeles. The crowds were small but angry. They didn't ask for conspiracy theories. They asked for clarity. The government doubled down. Another official statement came out, flat and rehearsed. These documents are a foreign forgery designed to destabilize American unity. We advise the public to avoid spreading unverified claims. That evening, an anonymous hacker collective, known for anti-authority campaigns, posted a threat on darknet forums. You've got 48 hours. Release the truth, or we will. They claimed to have additional verifying files, enough to make black. Dust looked like an opening act, markets responded. The stock exchange dipped as old rumors resurfaced. Allegations of insider trading in the days before the 9/11 attacks. Defense contractors with ties to the intelligence community saw shares fall fast. Corporations quietly braced for backlash. Keene watched all of it unfold from a friend's cabin. deep in the woods. The place was forgotten. A hunting retreat with no cell signal, no internet. Just a static-filled radio, a crackling fireplace, and the creeping fear that everything might come crashing down. On the radio, clipped voices debated whether he was a whistleblower or a traitor. Then came the confirmation. The FBI had publicly named him. Thomas Keene, former federal employee, wanted in connection with the unlawful release of classified materials. The phrase domestic extremist was repeated in every press release. He stared at the radio. His name, once just a line on a government ID badge, was now a household term. His former co-workers said nothing publicly, but Keene knew some of them must have guessed. They'd seen how meticulous he was, how obsessed he'd become with odd patterns in the data, reports that didn't add up, timelines that contradicted themselves. They also knew he wasn't crazy. Among the growing noise was one voice that caught his attention. Sarah Voss, an investigative journalist once hailed for her bravery, then blacklisted for probing too deeply into 9/11 narratives. Sarah had chased dead ends, missing files, and silent sources for years. She'd lost her network job for refusing to soften a segment that hinted at state complicity. Now she was back. The documents in black dust echoed whispers she'd heard in parking garages and encrypted emails long ago, only now they were laid out in detail. She recognized the structure, the language, even a few names. She reached out to the site hosting the files and left an encrypted message. "I can help verify. Let me speak to the source." The message, after bouncing through multiple proxy layers, eventually reached Thomas. Sitting in that cold cabin, he read it on a makeshift secure line and hesitated. He didn't know her. Could he trust her? But he also knew he couldn't stay silent. He typed his reply carefully. "It's real. I need help. Meet me. But be smart. They're watching everyone." That message was the start of an uneasy alliance. Sarah would be his only hope of exposing the truth before the government closed in. If she faltered, or if they were too slow, the system, designed to silence threats, would crush him. Because if the full depth of the deception came to light, it wouldn't just topple politicians. It would burn entire institutions. There were billions of dollars, 2 decades of war, and the reputation of a nation at stake. 2 days after the leak, the national conversation had twisted into chaos. Mainstream networks repeated the government's narrative like a chant, an elaborate hoax, possibly AI-generated. But smaller media outlets weren't so quick to dismiss it. Some journalists began posting side-by-side comparisons, legitimate declassified memos next to excerpts from black dust. The formatting, language patterns, digital metadata, it all lined up. Ordinary people were split. Some believed the documents completely. They were angry, vindicated, ready for justice. Others recoiled in disbelief. The idea that their government might have orchestrated or allowed the worst attack on US soil was too big, too cruel. It meant questioning everything, their memories, their grief, their sense of security. Thomas Keene was now the most wanted man in America. He hadn't always been this. Just 2 years ago, he was a mid-level data analyst at FBI headquarters. Respected, if a little obsessive. Quiet. Focused. He'd built a reputation for spotting anomalies, strange financial flows, odd travel records, communications that didn't match up. But when his flagged reports started pointing too close to something bigger, someone above him ordered them sealed, buried, forgotten. That's when he started copying files in secret. When he resigned, no one suspected. They thought he was burnt out, disillusioned. Maybe he was. But he left with more than just a goodbye email. Now, his old supervisors told the press he was mentally unstable, a loner, a fringe theorist. What they didn't mention was how close he had come, years earlier, to triggering a full internal inquiry, until senior leadership shut it down, quietly but firmly. In a quiet suburban neighborhood outside the capital, A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of a modest two-story house. The sun had just set. 4 men in plain suits stepped out, stone-faced. They weren't from the FBI. They worked for a shadow operation, an unofficial arm of a group known only by rumors, the Black Archive. Its existence had never been proven, but those in the know whispered of it. An agency within the agency, designed not to protect national security, but to protect the secrets that powered it. Secrets like this. They didn't knock. They just pushed past the man standing in the doorway. A tired-looking, middle-aged data engineer named Malcolm Reeds. He used to work with Keane, back before things spiraled into paranoia and shadows. Now, he stood stunned in his own living room as 3 men in plain black jackets rifled through his belongings. "Your computer!" one of them barked. Reeds hesitated, mouth half open in protest, but one look at the man's cold stare shut him up. With trembling hands, he unlocked the machine. They tore through his files, scanning emails, download folders, message logs. Anything mentioning Thomas, black dust, or files with strange hashes were instantly copied onto their drives. They gave no ID, no badge, no warrant. Because they didn't need one. These men weren't regular law enforcement. They were part of something above the law. They answered to a different command, far removed from oversight. At the top of that chain was Director Eldridge Shaw, a name rarely spoken, allowed in public circles. He sat in a glass-paneled corner office of a newly formed intelligence megastructure, a Frankenstein agency stitched together after 9/11 from remnants of the NSA, CIA, and military intelligence. He remembered the day of the attacks clearly, the smell of burning paper, the endless reruns on the lobby TVs, the sudden vacuum of rules. It was chaos, opportunity. Shaw had risen fast, aligning himself with surveillance hawks and defense contractors. He'd championed the Patriot Act, called for proactive containment of digital threats. But now, some files, leaked documents that had surfaced online like oil slicks, threatened to topple everything he'd built. He turned toward his senior staff. "Find this, Reeve, or Keane, whatever alias he's using. We're not losing 20 years of infrastructure because of a conspiracy blog post. I want him contained before this spreads." Meanwhile, Thomas Keane knew the net was tightening. He kept to back roads, avoiding major highways and metro hubs. At checkpoints, he switched vehicles, an old van bought off record, and used an identity card from a past life. He slept in motels that didn't ask questions, paid in cash under borrowed names. He lived on granola bars, canned coffee, and the gnawing pressure that any moment a black SUV might come screeching into view, lights blinding, doors flying open. His nerves were frayed, every knock on the wall, every flicker of light outside. His window made his pulse spike. Then a message popped up on his encrypted chat app. From someone he hadn't expected to hear from. Sarah Voss. "We need to meet. I can help verify the files. People still trust me, at least the ones that matter. But we have to move soon. The window is closing." He stared at the message, hesitant. A face-to-face meeting. It was a risk, but if they didn't take risks, the files would rot in obscurity, dismissed as another fringe theory. He typed back, thumb hovering before hitting send. Where? The next evening, they met in the back of a small-town library, after hours. Keane circled the block before parking, spotting a nondescript grey sedan idling near the lot entrance. A chill slid down his spine. Watchers? He took another lap. When he returned, the car hadn't moved. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. But he couldn't back out now. Inside, Sarah Voss was already waiting. She was taller than he expected, wrapped in a weathered leather jacket, her eyes sharp with urgency. She gave a small nod as he entered, and they tucked themselves into a shadowed corner between forgotten shelves. "Thomas," she said quietly, extending her hand. "I believe you. The official story. It's always had gaps. Let's finish this." He exhaled, tension slipping just slightly. With a shaking hand, He pulled a small USB drive from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. This version's cleaner. Full memos, the ops logs, emails talking about asset control, failures. That's how they referred to the hijackers. Some of the files even track bank wires. And there's a directive, Sarah. Something called Operation Silence. It's all in there. His voice broke. He turned away for a second, eyes shining. They used that day, Sarah. Turned it into an excuse for endless war. Either they let it happen or they made it happen. Sarah's face went pale as she skimmed the files on her laptop. These aren't theories, she muttered. They're reports, signatures, budget breakdowns. This changes everything. But we can't just drop this on a blog, she added quickly. It'll get buried, flagged, discredited within hours. We need something big, a mainstream figure with enough balls to run it. Or maybe a live event, something public and viral, something they can't scrub fast enough. Before Keane could reply, a muffled noise echoed from the front of the library. The door creaked open. A dark silhouette lingered just inside the frame. Keane's body locked up. Sarah's eyes widened. She snapped the laptop shut. They ducked behind a shelf, breath held, footsteps. Then, "Evening, folks," a cheery voice called. It was the old librarian, bumbling through with his flashlight. He smiled, oblivious. Keane peeked through the shelves. The dark figure outside turned away, walking off into the fog. False alarm, or maybe a scout, confirming the meeting had taken place. They didn't wait to find out. They split fast. No hugs, no long goodbyes. Just a plan. Meet again in 48 hours. Just outside a small news station on the edge of a major city, one that still had a few employees with spines intact. They'd hijack a live feed if they had to. The danger was now volcanic. If the Watchers had picked up on their plan, they wouldn't just be hunted. They'd be silenced, for good. That night, as Keane sat on the edge of a motel bed staring at the plastic curtain and breathing shallow in the dark, his burner phone buzzed. A message. "T, they found me. I don't know how. I didn't talk. I swear. They're at the door." It was from Arjun, the guy who'd helped him decode flight data logs just last week. The message ended there. No follow-up. Keane's mouth went dry. He stared at the screen for a full minute before powering the phone off and smashing the SIM with the motel's metal waste bin lid. They were out of time. Keane stared at his burner phone, his thumb hovering above the screen as the final message blinked. "One of our guys is dead. A boat accident. They're picking us off." Then nothing. The typing dots vanished. He swallowed hard. The Watchers had started killing. Not just hunting him, but systematically silencing anyone connected to the leak. People who could verify the authenticity of the files. Friends, colleagues, all vanishing under the guise of freak accidents. A car crash here, a drowning there, all too convenient. Keane leaned against the chipped wall of a motel bathroom, the buzzing neon light above the mirror flickering like a bad omen. The space reeked of mildew and cheap bleach, but he didn't care. His pulse thudded in his throat. The window for the truth was closing, and fast. Outside in the streets, the nation was cracking open. Protests flared in major cities, rows of people holding signs with phrases like, "Who knew and when?" and "Truth for the fallen." Candlelight vigils blurred into angry chants. Social media boiled with outrage and confusion. Some called the leaks an insult to the memory of the victims. Others said exposing the truth, no matter how painful, was the only path to healing. The government responded with denial and fury. Director Eldridge Shaw appeared on national television, flanked by emotionless officials. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed pressure. "Those spreading falsehoods and foreign-forged conspiracies will be held accountable," he said, his voice heavy, rehearsed. "We will not let domestic agitators erode our national unity. Justice will be swift." He didn't blink once during the entire 2-minute address. Behind the scenes, Sarah Voss was working relentlessly. One night, She called Keen from a safe connection. Her voice trembled with adrenaline. "I found something buried in the memo clusters," she said. "It mentions a deeper archive, not just communications, money trails." Keen sat up straight. "You mean funding?" "No, I mean everything. A financial map. It's called the Saturn Files. It tracks where the money went after the attacks. Black budgets, contractors, oil firms, even political campaigns. If it's real, it connects the dots in a way nothing else can." Keen went silent. The implications burned in his mind. "This is it," Sarah said. "This ledger, if we find it, could be the final nail. No one can call this a theory if we show them the receipts." But time was against them. Surveillance had escalated. Helicopters hovered over highways. Random car stops had tripled. People were jittery, like they could sense something rotten just beneath the surface. Even those who didn't believe the leak were beginning to question why the government was acting like it had something to hide. Keen moved constantly, motel to motel, disguise to disguise. He'd dyed his hair twice, grown a beard, changed his gait. But each step forward felt thinner, each rest shorter. He knew soon they'd either find him, or he'd have to make his stand. What he didn't know was that the Watchers had already greenlit a kill team, a classified Black Ops unit with one mission: make sure the leak never gained traction. If Keen couldn't find the Saturn Files, and fast, the machine would grind over the truth and erase every trace. The next week was a blur of panic and urgency. By day, Keen dodged surveillance. By night, he and Sarah met in borrowed rooms, decrypted fragments by lamplight, their shadows flickering against motel wallpaper. The pieces of the Saturn Files were scattered like puzzle shards. Old CIA reports, corrupted NSA spreadsheets, redacted budget sheets. Eventually, they found a lead. An old, decommissioned NSA site tucked into the desert, just outside a dusty southwestern town, officially shut down in 2006. Unofficially, rumored to store legacy backups too sensitive to risk deletion. Sarah leaned over a map, her finger tapping the location. "We get in there, we pull the archive, we copy the files raw. It's the last shot." Keen nodded, but the doubt in his gut tightened. "And if there's nothing there?" Sarah looked up. "Then we're dead anyway." They had almost nothing. An aging hatchback, 3 laptops, and a few thousand in cash. Meanwhile, the Watchers had drones, satellite feeds, biometric databases, tactical teams. But they had one advantage. No one expected a direct breach on a dead facility. Shaw, on the other hand, had launched a full media blitz. The new official narrative, a rogue ex-FBI analyst, Keen, was spreading digitally forged documents sourced from hostile foreign intelligence. Talk show pundits called for stricter surveillance laws. Lawmakers nodded gravely on camera, but even as the story spread, cracks began to form. Another whistleblower, a data archivist, was found shot in his home. Police called it a robbery gone wrong. The press barely asked why the only missing item was a hard drive. Online, the conspiracy buzz had evolved into something sharper. The hashtag #OneBlackDust exploded. In city squares, people raised hand-painted signs reading "Truth over terror" and "Stop killing the whistleblowers." Public anger became a threat of its own. The government responded with mass arrests, labeling protesters as agitators. Some news outlets began questioning the crackdown. Others played defense, parroting press releases. But the question echoed louder each day. If it's all fake, why are they hunting them like criminals? Through all of it, Keen remained locked in his mission. In his gut, he knew. If the Saturn Files were real, they would expose the very foundation of the machine. Hidden money trails, direct transfers from corporate boards to politicians, arms contracts greenlit just days after the attack. It wouldn't just challenge the narrative, it would incinerate it. And the people might finally see what had been done in their name. All of it. The surveillance, the assassinations, the framing, tied back to one unthinkable truth. The attacks had been a false flag, and the aftermath? A goldmine for war profiteers. Legislation flew through Congress like a bullet through soft wood, funneling billions into military budgets. "No wonder they'll do anything to stop us," Sarah murmured, her voice low and bitter. They didn't take planes or trains, just a beat-up sedan and burner phones moving west on back roads. Every night was a different seedy motel. No names, no IDs, just cash slid silently across cracked counters. They avoided highways, fearing license plate readers or patrol checkpoints. The watchers, they were sure, didn't know their exact destination, but probably had some idea of their goal. Expose the rot, rip open the cover-up. But secrecy came at a cost. Tension between them grew heavier with every mile. Sarah barely slept. Keen flinched at every siren in the distance. The country had slipped into something just shy of martial law. Every newscast screamed about Thomas Keene, domestic terrorist, traitor, enemy of peace. Billboards offered rewards for turning him in, his face plastered across highways like a wanted outlaw. He kept his cap low, sunglasses dark, but every gas station visit felt like a gamble. Then came the close call. It happened on a lonely stretch of two-lane blacktop cutting through farmlands. Keene spotted the black SUV first, closing fast in the mirror. "Behind us," he said calmly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I see it," Sarah replied, already scanning for exits. It accelerated. Sarah yanked the wheel, veering onto a dirt service road that cut between cornfields. The SUV followed without hesitation. Tires screamed. A shot cracked through the air, then another. The rear window shattered. A tire exploded. The car spun out, crashing nose first into a ditch. Dazed, they scrambled out, diving into the corn. The tall stalks swallowed them. Footsteps and flashlights danced behind them, but the watchers eventually pulled back. Maybe they didn't want to risk a firefight out in the open. Maybe they thought they'd finish it later. Either way, they left. Keene lay still in the dirt, chest heaving. "They're getting desperate," he said between breaths. "That means we're close," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but there was steel behind it. Finally, after nearly a week, they reached their destination, what remained of an old NSA outpost. The place looked like a forgotten relic. Crumbling fence, rusted signs warning of surveillance and trespassing, weeds pushing through broken asphalt. Twilight painted everything in shadows. If secrets were buried anywhere, it was here. A portion of the fence had already been cut, probably by looters years ago. They slipped through, quiet as ghosts. The main structure loomed ahead, boarded windows and graffiti-covered walls giving it the feel of a mausoleum. Somewhere nearby, a coyote howled. Inside, the building smelled of mold and rust, paint peeled, in long curling strips from the walls. Their flashlights cut through the dark, bouncing off overturned cubicles and abandoned desks. They found stairs to the sub-basement, and there, among tangled wires and old server racks, came a soft beep. "There's still power," Keene muttered, eyeing a blinking panel. "That's not good." It meant the site wasn't as dead as it looked. Someone, possibly the Watchers, was still drawing data from here. They found a steel door labeled Server Vault, Archive 6. It was locked. Sarah pulled out her phone and loaded the code they'd found buried in a corrupted PDF, probably an access sequence for older security systems. She keyed it in. Nothing. Tried again. A third attempt. Green light. Click. The heavy door creaked open to reveal rows of shelves lined with magnetic tapes and dusty hard drives. The air was cool, humming faintly with preserved heat. Minimal climate control, just enough to keep things from decaying. They moved fast. Operation Cast Peak. Post-K war roster. Here, Saturn. Keene pointed to a battered rack of servers marked Saturn FSV. He powered one up, connecting it to Sarah's laptop. She typed quickly, navigating the system. Restricted. Saturn 123. Enter password. They tried passphrases pulled from the leaked documents. The third one worked. A soft beep, and the screen unlocked. They were in. Files unfurled. Rows. and rows of internal communications, asset reports, classified authorizations. Keane read aloud, stunned. They approved demolitions of key buildings before the attack. Insider trading orders. Exactly 2 days before everything hit. Sarah whispered, scrolling. Massive defense contracts greenlit right after. This isn't just cover-up. This is orchestration. High-level officials, banks, media liaisons. Keane swallowed hard. They used the fear to push through an entire doctrine of endless war. Manufactured consent. And look, Sarah pointed, horrified. Some of the hijackers, they were known, tracked, even employed. My God. They sat in silence, the betrayal flooding in like cold water. All the lives lost, all the wars since, built on this. Then above them, a creak. Footsteps. They froze. The power, Sarah whispered. They must have traced it. Keane didn't hesitate. We copy everything, now! He launched a transfer to several external drives. Sarah killed their flashlights, ducking behind one of the server racks. She checked the pistol she kept in her coat. Footsteps thundered. Down the stairs, flashlights blazed through the room. There! Someone shouted. Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into metal shelves and ripped through dust clouds. Sarah ducked and returned fire, trying to buy time. Keane kept working. He pulled out a satellite uplink module, linking the server to a secure overseas drop point. 10% transferred. A deep voice cut through the chaos. Stop! Director Shaw. His voice echoed, sharp and commanding. You don't know what you're doing, Keane. You'll collapse alliances that have kept the world stable for decades. Keane didn't look up. You call this stability? Sarah fired again. Sparks flew. We managed that day, Shaw shouted, stepping into view, gun drawn. It was messy, but it was necessary. You think truth fixes things. Truth destroys nations. The progress bar ticked upward. Percent. Sarah cried out as a bullet grazed her shoulder, tearing through her jacket and skin. But she didn't falter. Gritting her teeth, she kept firing, keeping the watchers pinned behind the racks. The upload bar on the laptop crept forward, 45%, then 50%. Shaw barked from the stairwell. Throw it! Now! A flashbang arced through the room. Boom! The explosion was blinding. A white-hot light swallowed everything, followed by an ear-splitting crack. Sarah's ears rang violently. Her vision swam. She staggered, dizzy and disoriented. Then they were on her. 2 watchers slammed into her, forcing her to the ground. She fought like an animal, elbowing one in the jaw before a boot crushed her ribs. Another watcher lunged at Keane, driving him into a rack of humming drives. The laptop hit the floor, screen cracking under a heavy boot. The upload froze. 80%. No, Keane shouted, struggling beneath the weight of his attacker. In desperation, he grabbed the broken laptop and swung it, smashing it into the watcher's face with a sickening crack. The man crumpled. The laptop, incredibly, sparked back to life. The screen flickered, and the upload resumed, 81%, 82%. Pull the cables, someone yelled. A watcher yanked at the tangled wires, just as a stray round punctured the side of a nearby coolant tank. A high-pressure hiss shrieked through the vault as freezing mist erupted. The air turned white, clouding vision. Liquid coolant splashed across the floor, making everything slick and volatile. Shaw pushed forward through the chaos, gun aimed directly at Keane. You don't get it, he said, calm and venomous. You can die here, clinging to your fantasy, or you can disappear. Either way, this never reaches daylight. Behind him, flickering sparks kissed the coolant vapor. Then, boom. The breach in the coolant line triggered a cascade of sparks from exposed wires. Old circuits overloaded. An electrical box popped. Then fire licked up the back wall, fast and hungry. Someone screamed. The vault filled with smoke. Watchers scrambled for exits. Sarah crawled toward the server rack, dragging her, wounded arm. Her eyes found Keane, barely standing, blood dripping from his temple. The screen showed 98%. Come on, he whispered. With a roar that sounded more like agony than victory, Keen smashed the final key to confirm upload. Beep! Upload complete. The screen dimmed. A watcher, furious, raised his rifle and fired. Keen's body jerked as the bullet struck, him square in the chest. He collapsed backward. The air knocked from his lungs. Darkness closed around him. The watcher rushed forward and ripped the cable from the laptop. Too late. The signal was already gone. The Saturn files had been uploaded, dispersed, mirrored, impossible to erase. Alarms blared as fire spread through the lower level. A second explosion rocked the basement, flinging bodies across the room. Sarah was tossed by the shockwave, slamming, into a wall before everything went black. The watchers, what was left of them, retreated, dragging Shaw out. Flames swallowed the sub-basement. Concrete cracked, and with a roar, the floor above caved in, burying everything beneath. No one was sure if Keen survived, but the war was already lost. Within hours, the files appeared on encrypted forums, then public servers, then news sites. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with links. The Saturn files trended worldwide. Mirror sites popped up faster than authorities could take them down. Journalists, whistleblowers, archivists, even teenage coders grabbed pieces and made sure they stayed online. The evidence was staggering. Documents marked White Dome Initiative and Project Switchboard outlined a horrifying reality. Intelligence agencies had coordinated with extremist cells, allowing the attacks to proceed as planned. Why? To justify a war economy, to consolidate power, to push legislation that otherwise would have died in committee. Some files showed high-level cabinet meetings discussing acceptable civilian losses, like chess pieces. Allies of the US demanded immediate explanations. Germany, France, Japan, all called for emergency UN sessions. Iran and China accused the US of crimes against humanity. Protesters filled streets from London to Jakarta. In America, the impact was seismic. Mass protests exploded in DC, LA, Chicago, and New York. Demonstrators carried signs with Keen's image, now a symbol of truth, not terror. Others called for full resignations. Lawsuits followed. Several defense contractors' stocks plummeted. Executives resigned, some vanishing overseas overnight. Retired generals gave statements, some outright confessions, others tepid denials. Former intelligence directors were summoned before Congress. C-SPAN broadcasts turned into viral clips of red-faced senators screaming and crying. The White House tried damage control. They called the documents heavily edited and possible forgeries. But digital analysts across the globe confirmed their authenticity. Metadata, cryptographic signatures, and access timestamps all matched 20-year-old protocols. Several mid-level intelligence employees, anonymous and terrified, corroborated the leaks. One said simply, "I wish it weren't true." But it is. Mainstream media split. Some outlets, after initial denials, reversed course and aired the evidence. High-profile anchors wept on air, apologizing for parroting government talking points for years. Others clung to patriotic framing, labeling the data psyops and calling for unity. But the damage was done. "You can't close the barn door after the horses fled," one commentator said. This isn't just a scandal, this is the unraveling of a 20-year lie. The very foundation of post-attack policy, the wars, the surveillance, the fear, was now in question. And though Thomas Keen may have died in a flaming grave, the truth he unearthed refused to be buried. Director Eldridge Shaw stood behind the podium, flanked by stern-faced security officers as cameras clicked and networks went live. He adjusted, his tie trying to project calm authority. But the crowd wasn't listening. Boos drowned out his voice. "Liar! Where were you when we needed the truth? Resign!" His speech dissolved in the uproar. The carefully prepared statement fell flat, and Shaw's face tightened. That was supposed to be his moment of control, a chance to reframe the chaos. Instead, it confirmed to the public just how hollow the system had become. In a desperate final move, Shaw's office declared a national security emergency. They proposed emergency measures, curfews, military deployments, digital monitoring. They claimed it was to prevent further unrest, but instead of calming the storm, it ignited a fire. Several governors outright refused to comply. "This is not martial law. This is panic," one state leader announced on live TV. Another added, "You don't get to silence the country just because it's finally speaking." Over the next few weeks, the very structure of post-attack authority began to fracture. Investigations erupted from multiple directions: Senate subcommittees, international tribunals, and independent watchdog groups. A few bold lawmakers, previously sidelined, now led aggressive probes into who benefited from the post-9/11 expansions and how deeply the corruption ran. And then Sarah Voss reappeared. She had survived, bruised, stitched, and quieter than before, but very much alive. Emerging from the Southwest Hospital where she'd been treated under a false name, Sarah stepped back into the spotlight, not for fame, but because she owed it to Keane. In an emotional column titled "One Man's Last Key," Press, she told the story no one had heard, the real one, the firefight, the flames. Keane's body collapsing as the upload hit 100%. "He died ensuring you would never be lied to again," she wrote. Her words were raw, unpolished, and unmistakably real. The column went viral. In hours, it shaped the narrative. Thomas Keane wasn't just a whistleblower. He was a martyr, a man who chose the truth over his own life. The public clung to that image, a bloodied figure pressing a final key while the world around him collapsed. Families of 9/11 victims demanded new hearings. The old commissions were discredited, a buried trove of sealed evidence. Contradictory reports, overlooked warnings, and silenced testimony surfaced again. Some former investigators confessed they'd been misled. Others admitted they were threatened into silence. America wept all over again, not from fresh loss, but from the realization that so much of what they'd believed had been carefully manufactured. People asked hard questions. How did fear become so profitable? How did ordinary people let it happen? Why did the truth take so long to surface? The shockwaves weren't limited to US soil. Abroad, countries that had stood beside America in the war on terror felt betrayed. Some withdrew troops from ongoing operations. Others launched internal reviews, fearing their intelligence services had also been compromised. The post-attack alliance, the backbone of 2 decades of war, started to crumble. In the power vacuum, hopes and fears grew in equal measure. Some dreamed of a less militarized world. Others worried that new extremists would fill the void. And amid all the chaos, rumors began to spread. Thomas Keane might still be alive. There were blurry photos. Stories of a man hiding in mountain villages or working odd jobs in coastal towns under an alias. One woman swore she saw him in a Honduran port, watching a protest on an old TV. Officially, Keane was declared presumed dead. Unofficially, people wanted to believe otherwise, that maybe he'd walked away, knowing he'd finished what he came to do. 6 months after the leak, the Senate convened an emergency hearing. Broadcast live, it became one of the most watched events in modern history. Former generals, CEOs, intelligence directors, even members of old administrations were brought before Congress. Some invoked national security protections, others pled the Fifth. A few, cornered by evidence too damning to deny, gave partial confessions. There were no sweeping convictions. The machine was too large, too layered. But something changed. The illusion of untouchability cracked. People no longer took the official story at face value. That alone was a revolution. Meanwhile, Sarah Voss launched an independent news network. It was simple, a daily show that focused on truth-finding. Not spectacle, not clickbait, just facts, testimonies, files, questions no one had asked. She called it False Skies. Whistleblowers found refuge there. Journalists blacklisted by legacy networks were given platforms again. Survivors spoke. Former agents broke silence. Sarah became a public figure, not a celebrity, an icon of accountability. Exactly 1 year after the Saturn files detonated across the internet, a memorial was unveiled near Ground Zero. A single bronze figure stood beneath a digital sculpture of a key, finger pressed down. Mid-stroke, the plaque read, "They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light." Visitors left flowers, letters. Some just stood and cried. Not because the pain had faded, but because, finally, they knew its full shape. Epilogue. In a small coastal town where the mountains met the sea, a fisherman swore he met a man who looked familiar. Eyes like they'd seen too much, he told a reporter. The man spoke quietly, said he used to work for the government, talked about the weight of illusions, about what it cost to lift the veil. The next morning, he was gone. Left nothing but a battered flash drive sitting on a dock post. Was it keen? No one knows. Some believe he chose obscurity over credit, that he'd sacrificed enough, that the world could take it from here. Public trust in institutions never fully recovered. Many remained angry, some stayed fearful, but a growing number became hopeful. Transparency was no longer just an idea, it was a demand. Conspiracy watchers continued to debate if the watchers still operated, planning new deceptions. Black dust, they said, was still in the air, but one thing was certain. The greatest lie of a generation had been exposed, and the truth, once chained in darkness, had burned its way into daylight. They used fear to shape the world, but one day, fear lost and truth soared free.